Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, January 12th, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, 2 guests. First, Jamie Ducharme, health correspondent at Time Magazine, author of Big Vape, The Incendiary Rise of Juul. And then we'll be talking to Dr. MarkAlain Dery, infectious disease specialist at AccessHealth Louisiana, the host of the Noise Filter podcast. But first, Anthony Fauci declares Omicron coming for most of us, as the majority of Europe will be catching it. Joe Biden endorses filibuster reform in what feels like an increasingly inconsequential rhetorical bid. Angus King to unveil a bill designed to stop a rerun of the Trump 2020 flip electors plan. Consumer prices jump again as Powell says the Fed may raise rates. 8,000 Kroger's employees go on strike across the country. Biden administration weighs new mask distribution plans. And the UN calls for $5 billion in aid to save Afghanistan. Lastly, U.S. temperatures in 2021 hit records on both extremes. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday. Emma Vigeland is here to put that into context for us.
Yes, it's hump day. It's hump day.
Thank you. It is hump day.
Hello.
Did I screw up the intro? Did I not say the heartland of America today?
I don't know. I was like, I had trouble sleeping last night. I'm a little.
I was gonna say,
I'm really tired. Yeah.
I had to take a nap too. I don't know. That's going around.
When I saw you lay down to take a nap, I thought, oh my God, I wish that was me.
Yeah. Well, you got to get in there early to nap before the
privilege.
Show. Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know why. Just like one of those nights, I could not fall asleep. So
I was making the decision. I was like, 1 couch or 2 couches? I'm like, I'm only going to need 1.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep, there you go.
That's the kind of boss you are.
That's right.
If you want a nap, you get on the dirt floor.
That's
people don't realize that we broadcast out of a barn.
We do not have a paved or any type of flooring.
We do not have paved flooring.
That's right. But the good thing is, in the spring we can then plant and grow our own food
and our own Seder.
Exactly. Which, incidentally, there is a new report out now. I don't know that it has anything to do with. I got to look into that. But there is a report out that different types of Seder A and G, I think it is, scientists have done a peer-reviewed study that I believe it was in Nature magazine that apparently, in combination with a vaccination, this cannabinoid. And I'm not exactly sure how it works. If you would just take it, or it's unclear. And I want to make it clear, I have no idea if it's even the same product that is in the Sunset Lake stuff that we promote. So I don't want anybody to make that mistake. Although we're going to look into it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of research on that.
We're going to do a lot of research on it. They couldn't do the research on the THC because, of course, it's still illegal on a federal level.
Can we get half the energy behind the hydroxychloroquine behind this sort of ban?
Unbelievable. But the scientists found that I guess it inhibits the spike protein. Maybe we'll talk to MarkAlain Dery about this. This report just came out, I think, today. So I don't know how many people have caught up with it. But we will look into that. But I don't know. That was pretty. That was pretty interesting. Now, of course, that will be, if everything goes to, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see like what happens with that information, because if what we've been told is true, 1 million Substacks are going to grow now to talk about how this is not being promoted properly, right? Isn't that the way this works?
The cannabinoids thing?
Yeah. Right? I mean, because this would immediately, those people will be assassinated.
Well, there's nothing to commodify there. It's like,
yeah,
it's the if it's anti-cannabis, then it's.
No, it's pro-cannabis.
I thought you said it inhibited the.
It inhibits the spike protein. It inhibits COVID.
This is going to be a long show.
Oh my gosh.
The Substack thing is about.
Emma did not show up today.
I was saying I have more of this cold brew.
Yeah.
It doesn't flatter reactionaries, so no, I don't think it will be popular on Substack.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens with it. Now, if this is working properly, Anthony Fauci has already sent out a team of assassins to take out those researchers and all of the publications that have written about it. In fact, this could be the last time that I'm around until, the assassins come for me.
Right.
And then, of course, 1 million Substacks will grow around the my being deplatformed and assassinated. So, all right, let's get to this. Joe Biden in Georgia.
Ugh.
Now, as much as I share your with this, we should also say that yesterday, Mitt Romney is on the floor of the Senate comparing this speech by Biden to what Trump did in the last election. And let's be clear about what we're talking about. We don't know exactly what the legislation that would be passed at this point, because Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema have decided that the filibuster is too sacrosanct. But it is a not unreasonable assumption that any legislation that passes by the Democrats would reinstate the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, which has been law of the land, or was, from 1965 to 2013, before a conservative Supreme Court decided that, in fact, racism had ended in this country. And I'm not being, that's not hyperbole. Or hyperbole.
It's not hyperbole.
It's neither.
What was the guy saying?
Anna Scalia basically said, enough of giving minorities special treatment. And then, of course, as soon as the Supreme Court gutted Section 5, you saw a bevy of these same states that were under the pre-clearance provision go and institute voting changes that inhibited black peoples and disenfranchised black people.
They said racism was solved, so there was no need anymore.
No need. But here is Joe Biden delivering this speech in Atlanta, and here it is.
Today, we call on Congress to get done what history will judge. Pass the Freedom to Vote Act. Pass it now, which will prevent voter suppression. So that here in Georgia, there's full access to voting by mail. There are enough drop boxes during enough hours so that you can bring food and water as well. to people waiting in line. The Freedom to Vote Act takes on election subversion to protect nonpartisan electors, officials who are doing their job from intimidation and interference. It would get dark money out of politics, create fair district maps, and ending partisan gerrymandering. Look, it's also time to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. I've been having these quiet conversations with the members of Congress for the last 2 months. I'm tired of being quiet. Folks, it'll restore the strength of the Voting Rights Act of '65, the one President Johnson signed after John Lewis was beaten, nearly killed on Bloody Sunday, only to have the Supreme Court weakened it multiple times over the past decade. Restoring the Voting Rights Act would mean the Justice Department can stop discriminatory laws before they go into effect. Before they go into effect.
I mean, all well and good. I suspect that maybe there should have been a slightly bigger investment than 2 months of being quiet with the senators. Maybe we should have seen this coming down the pike a little bit. Maybe a year into the presidency. It could have been maybe 3 or 4 months, even maybe 2.5 months, maybe 9 or 10 weeks. I mean, can you imagine LBJ? I'm really tired of whispering to people. Maybe you shouldn't have been so quiet. Maybe there should have been usage of the powers of the presidency to leverage Joe Manchin's behavior. I don't know what that could be. Like, how about some executive orders that make coal that much more difficult to profit on? Or, I mean, is there really nothing to investigate? Like, yeah, I mean, this is stuff is hardball politics. But it's not enough to say, like, I'm tired of being quiet.
Yeah. Well, why is he quiet? I mean, that's also feeding into this exact perception with Biden that he doesn't really know how to lead forcefully.
It's this generic Democrat register, like it's the Republicans who are standing in the way, but it's like, you got to get your guys. You should be marching to West Virginia and Arizona.
And for those of you who are out there, like, and I don't know if there's anybody listening to this who've said this, but I've seen people on Twitter talk about what we need to do is get Susan Collins and Mitt Romney. And we will talk about the Thomas Friedman article today, which suggests that maybe Lynn Cheney should be vice president. Liz or whichever. It doesn't really matter. Dick Cheney, for that matter, has as much, makes as much sense as far as I'm concerned. Thomas Friedman, honestly, I think, like, if you've ever seen, I saw my dog have a stroke. Yeah. It was really disturbing. It reminded me of reading that piece, the Thomas Friedman piece. It was like watching someone have an aneurysm right in front of you.
You're right. Your dog did have a stroke, though. It was like through the whole old time warp from. No, never mind. From just keep going. Keep going. Again, I need to
listen to Mitt Romney on the floor of the Senate. Let's just play a little bit of this, just to get a sense of just how bat crap crazy the Republicans are. This is Mitt Romney, the reasonable one.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I prepared some remarks to give this evening, but I had the occasion to watch President Biden as he spoke in Georgia just a few minutes ago, and he said quite a number of things that simply weren't true. He also accused a number of my good and principled colleagues in the Senate of having sinister, even racist inclinations. He charged that voting against his bill allies us with Bull Connor, George Wallace, and Jefferson Davis. So much for unifying the country and working across the aisle. More troubling, however, he said that the goal of some Republicans is to, quote, turn the will of the voters into a mere suggestion. And so President Biden goes down the same tragic road taken by President Trump, casting doubt on the reliability of American elections.
Oh, God.
This is a sad.
Yeah, I don't even want to hear anymore. First off, yes, when you reverse Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, even though it had been reauthorized by the Senate, and you prevent that fix, yes, you are aligning with some of the more well-known racists in the country in the past who have tried to prevent black people from voting. And when members of your own party were plotting to overthrow the election by changing, the electors that were sent from the state, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we've seen the documents. Then, yeah, you were doing that. Mitt Romney, the one with the principles.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why you're dividing the country here, Sam. But that's I think part of why Republicans like Mitt Romney are so dangerous, because when we uplifted the perspective of the never Trump Republican, it gives credence to these false both sidesisms that they rely on. So, I mean, that should be completely cast aside as ridiculous as it is. But he has legitimacy, and his perspective does, for some reason, because he's the kind of Republican that people think is reasonable. But that's an insane statement.
The chances of praising Republicans as a way of making other Republicans look bad, not coming back to bite you in the ass, is 0%. Everybody who venerated Bush or Romney or, Frum or whomever it is, this is what you get. This is why people are like, well, I mean, Republicans can't be that bad. Why we were platforming and listening to him the whole time. How bad was Donald Trump? Donald Trump was the problem, not Republicans. Insane. All right, we're going to be talking in just a moment to Jamie Ducharme, the health correspondent, Time, author of Big Vape and the Incendiary Rise of Juul. Before we do, just a reminder, it's your support that makes the show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Don't forget our big live show, May 15th, Boston at the Wilbur Theater. I noticed that Buffalo Tom, my favorite bands from Boston, they bumped their show that was actually going to happen at the end of this month in New York. They bumped it all the way to August.
Good company.
Wow. So what does that mean? Now you can go?
No, now we can bump stuff. It's okay that we bumped it because another...
Yeah, Buffalo Tom is bumping their show. I'm going to bump my show. We may even bump the show again just to...
Yeah.
Maybe we'll reschedule it and then bump it again. But you can get the tickets at Majority Live. Check it out. Also, shop.majorityreportradio.com. We were going to have the big coming out of our scarves. We're going to be at the live show, but it's next.
Oh, the Majority Report scarves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're nice. Wool.
Scarves.
Not itchy. Not itchy.
That's one thing we agree on. Scarves.
Yes.
Excellent.
Don't sleep on the scarves, folks. All right. I want to welcome to the program Jamie Ducharme. She's a health correspondent at Time and author of Big Vape, The Incendiary Rise of Juul. Jamie, welcome to the program. I'm here with Emma Vigeland.
Thanks so much for having me.
I was excited to have you on because this Juul, I don't want to tell any tales out of school, but I do have a teenage daughter. There have been issues in the past. Not as of late, but back, when she was not as mature as she is now.
You're being very subtle about this. No one knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, okay. My kid got busted for Juul in junior high. So
you are not alone. That is very, very common.
Well, I want to talk about this because there's actually been over the past couple months some action on this and then some lack of action. But before we get there, give us a little bit of a history of Juul and particularly e-cigarettes, because there still seems to be some question as to the value of these things to society in some way.
Yeah, so it's actually a longer history than some people might realize. I'll try to keep it brief, though. Essentially, e-cigarettes first showed up in the US around 2007. Back then, they either kind of looked like cigarettes, very, very closely modeled to that, or they were these big, bulky things that were kind of annoying to lug around. You had to refill it yourself. Not a lot of people were into that. Juul.
I can interrupt you just one moment. I think if people go back on YouTube and look in 2008, Mark Maron and I tested out some electronic cigarettes for Break Room Live. And that must have been 2008 because we were both a little bit smoky at that time.
Early adopters.
Somebody brought it in from it was a tech thing. It was like somebody from CNET, I think.
Well, they were big contraptions, right?
No, this was the smaller one,
okay.
The cigarette one.
Oh. Yeah, they did kind of start off as like a techie novelty device almost. Like some people were using them to quit smoking, but it was also sort of just this weird, like, hey, they made a cigarette electronic. Like, we got to try this out. They would sell them in mall kiosks. Like, they were truly a novelty product in the beginning. But when Juul launched in 2015, they really changed all of that. I mean, the device, as most people I think know by now, looks just like a flash drive. It's very sleek. It's metallic. It looks kind of like an Apple product. And suddenly people were not embarrassed to be seen using these products. They weren't the big bulky ones. They weren't the novelty cigarette knockoffs. So Juul's product really kind of started to take off after, it sold slowly at first and then took off quickly. Because it looked nice and because it delivered a lot of nicotine in a very potent small dose.
And you can have different flavors. I mean, I'm not sure what the flavor situation was prior to Juul, but like I'm sure that there wasn't a pina colada pod that you could just put in, and I know Sam loves pina colada flavored things.
So actually, I will say Juul never made pina colada flavors. Those flavors actually did predate Juul. So when Juul launched, they had fruit, mint, tobacco, and I'm drawing a blank, maybe creme brulee. I believe they launched with creme brulee. So they actually had a smaller menu of flavors than a lot of companies that were making like unicorn tears and gummy bear and some of the crazier ones.
All right. Well, so, I mean, just back up just a little bit. And what ostensibly was the point of this? I mean, this is coming at a time where really, I think like, smoking, the rate of smoking, during I guess it was in the aughts. I'm trying to remember now when smoking was outlawed in bars. I feel like it was in the late 90s. But it changed obviously at different places around the country. But the rate of smoking, it seems to me, particularly in terms of adoption, but also the number of quitting in this country during the aughts, the rate of smoking was like dropping like a stone. And so what was like, where was the impetus, not just for Juul, but all of this coming from? Like how much of it was big tobacco figuring out like what's another mechanism that we can have? How much of it was this is a way to get people off of cigarettes? And how much of it was just like, oh, if we plug it into the computer, people will buy it because it looks like technology?
Yeah. So actually, in the very earliest days of the industry, big tobacco really wasn't terribly involved. A lot of the early companies were kind of like startups, scrappy little operations. And that's what Juul was in the beginning. And then I think as these products started to get popular, as people, some people were using them to stop smoking, to wean themselves off cigarettes. Some people were using them just because they were kind of like techie and fun and they enjoyed it. But as they started to get popular among that variety of different groups, then I think cigarette companies kind of sat up and said, hey, a lot of people are using these new products. If they use them as intended, they will stop smoking cigarettes. So perhaps we should get involved in this. And, they spin it differently. They'll say that they believe that combustible tobacco is on its way out and all of these things. And that's probably true to an extent, but it was also a huge business opportunity for them. And it was a way to kind of staunch the bleeding of people, as you say, increasingly realizing that smoking's terrible and that they shouldn't be using cigarettes anymore.
What, tell us just about particularly, because Juul is the most, or was, I guess, the most popular iteration of this, right? Was there any other like version of this stuff that broke through in the way that Juul did?
No, I still think to this day, Juul is probably, if somebody knows the name of one e-cigarette, it's Juul, I would argue. So they launched in 2015. Both founders, were ex-smokers who kind of designed the product because they thought it was something that would help them and people like them who enjoyed smoking, frankly, but also knew that it was bad for them and needed something to kind of fill that void. Both really smart guys. They met in a product design program at Stanford, which I think helps explain why it's so sleek and why it's so easy to use and why it's just a better product, frankly, than a lot of what had been out there before. And those attributes combined with marketing, which I'm sure we will get into soon, I think helped Juul really become the first kind of household name e-cigarette.
Do we have data at this point before we get into the marketing, which I think is sort of the most controversial aspect of this? And but do we have data on A, its efficacy in getting people to quit smoking, and B, the health? I mean, those are the two real issues. And I should say that I can't remember what brand it was. It wasn't Juul because it was prior to that, but there was something like around, I was still chipping, as it were, back in like maybe the late aughts and around 2010. And I think it was like my last gasp of being a cigarette smoker was probably just finishing off those last couple with a day with an e-cigarette. And that only lasted like a month or two. I mean, I was already, basically had shut the door, but it made it just a little bit, the transition just a little bit easier.
Right. And there is data to support that. I mean, it's hard to find data about one specific company unless it's funded by that company, which obviously comes with some conflict of interest issues. But when you look at e-cigarettes as a category, they are not harmless. I mean, you're still inhaling nicotine and chemicals and things into your lungs, which if the choice is that or fresh air, you should pick fresh air. But when you compare them to combustible cigarettes, which are among the deadliest products in the world, it does seem that vaping is at least better for you or less bad for you. So some of the most compelling data I've seen suggests that people who use e-cigarettes, about 10% of the time, a little bit more, will successfully quit smoking. And that doesn't sound great, and it's not, but when you look at other nicotine replacement therapies like patches and gums, they're even less effective. So e-cigarettes are not probably a cure-all to the smoking problem, but they're also potentially a useful tool for some people.
But what's the difference in concentration of nicotine in something like a Juul pod versus, say you're going to smoke, I don't know, how much does like a regular smoker smoke per day, I guess?
Yeah, the easiest comparison is a Juul pod is roughly equivalent to a pack of cigarettes.
One pod, okay.
And do we have a sense of, I mean, putting aside, and we'll talk a little bit about the scare that was out there, which, I have mixed feelings about, frankly, the way that it was reported in the final analysis. But do we have a sense of like the health implications of e-cigarettes? And can you even, I mean, I guess, you can make blanket statements about the health implications of cigarettes. And then obviously within the context of that, there are some that are probably worse than others, because some had maybe, I don't know, at one time, people would say like, one brand had like fiberglass filters or something like that. But can we make a statement as to the health implications of e-cigarettes, of vapes? What's the variance in there, and where do those problems come from?
Sure. So I think one important caveat before getting into that is that because these products haven't been around super long, there isn't long-term data. There just can't be based on how long they've been available. So no one can really tell you what happens if you Juul every day for 30 years because no one has done that. But what I will say is based on the data that we have today, I think it's fair to say that vaping is worse for you than not using any tobacco product at all, but it's probably less dangerous than smoking cigarettes. So it's a real spectrum. I mean, the companies themselves will say, if you don't currently smoke, do not use our product. But most experts that I've talked to, with varying levels of confidence, will say that for a current smoker, it is a less dangerous choice to pick up an e-cigarette instead.
All right, let's talk about the sort of the controversy before we get into the how valid or how sincere those leaders of those companies are when they say, if you don't currently smoke, don't smoke cigarettes. Meanwhile, here's some gummy bear flavor or creme brulee, which of course, for those people who don't smoke cigarettes, there are no creme brulee cigarettes. They don't exist, nor do the gummy bear cigarettes exist. But first, let's talk about this controversy, because there was, I think, more than anything else, that controversy that existed, that people were dying from Juul's cigarette, was the one thing that got a lot of teenagers off it, because that stuff travels in Instagram and Snapchat circles in a way that like nothing as when I was a kid ever did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is in the summer of 2019, people, especially young people, especially teenagers, suddenly started turning up in emergency rooms with really scary, kind of inexplicable lung damage. And people at first had no idea what it was. It took, a couple dozen of these cases for doctors to start putting the pieces together and realize that vaping seemed to be the common thread. And it took even longer for them to figure out that most people who got sick had used illicit THC or marijuana vaping products. So in the time that it took to figure all of that out, there was just this message of vaping is dangerous. People are coming into emergency rooms unable to breathe with lung failure because of vaping. And I think you're right. A lot of people saw those headlines and thought, oh my God, maybe this is not harmless water vapor that I'm inhaling into my lungs. I should stop doing this. And it took a long time, I think, for the message to get out that it actually probably wasn't Juul and companies like Juul that were to blame, but the damage had been done. A lot of people were terrified and stopped vaping because of that story.
Talk about what happened in the wake of that and where we're at today with vaping. I mean, because they claim they were not marketing this to teenagers, but they were marketing this to teenagers.
Yes. So Juul's, the caveat on the asterisk, I guess, on any story about Juul is that their actions don't always seem to match up with their words about who the product is intended for. They'll tell you all day long that it's meant for adult smokers and no one else. But then when you look back to the way they launched the company, it's now infamous. They launched with this very colorful, very flashy ad campaign, models in their 20s, like dancing around with Juuls, wearing cool clothes on neon backgrounds. And they plastered these ads, in Times Square, on websites frequented by young people, on social media. And I think at best, you can claim that Juul was negligent in running a campaign like that. And at worst, you could argue that they, on some level, thought it might appeal to young people. The company denies that wholeheartedly, always has, but there's a pretty large subset of people who don't buy that and think that they knew exactly what they were doing with that kind of marketing.
Yeah, I think I am in that camp.
Yeah, you know what? I go back and forth. I've talked to, through the course of reporting my book, I've talked to a lot of people at the company who claim that it was more of negligence, that nobody in that room really thought through what they were doing. Nobody knew exactly what the implications of this campaign would be. And I think looking at it, it's hard for me to imagine seeing that campaign and thinking, this is fine, this is going to appeal to a 40-year-old smoker. But I've also never come across a single person who said, you know what, we wanted to addict teenagers. So I think it's somewhere in the middle of gross negligence and sort of willfully letting it happen.
Right. that's not a great sort of section to be in.
It's not. Absolutely not.
All right. So lastly, so where are we on this in terms of the FDA, in terms of, I mean, fortunately, I think like the Juul wave has subsided. I say that fortunately because I got another kid who's younger who will end up being in junior high in a couple of years. And the market share, I mean, it's still billions of dollars, or their market capitalization for this company is still billions of dollars. So it's not gone away. But where is the FDA on this? Where is the government, and what has happened?
Sure. So 2019, I would say, was the peak of the Juul hysteria. That's when the latest percentage in 2019 was that almost 30% of high school students said that they were using e-cigarettes, which was staggering, crazy, especially because so few teenagers were smoking. And then I think starting with that lung disease outbreak that we discussed, that was kind of the beginning of the end for Juul. I mean, it was just one thing after another. Lawmakers started to really sit up and say, we need to do something about this. States started banning flavored e-cigarettes. The FDA eventually banned flavored pods like the ones that Juul uses entirely. So the company just had to take most of its most lucrative products off the market. It was constantly getting sued, constantly getting hammered by lawmakers, and its market share just kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. It's, as you say, still a very profitable or very large company, but it is nowhere near as valuable as it was back then. And the place we find ourselves at now is that the FDA is going through one by one and deciding whether e-cigarettes can stay on the market in the US, whether they are beneficial enough to public health to kind of make up for the fact that teenagers use them and other downsides. And they were supposed to make those decisions this past fall. Most of them still have not come out, including that for Juul. So they are kind of in limbo at this moment, waiting to find out if they can continue to do business here.
You're a health writer. What's your opinion on this?
On whether they should stay on the market?
Yeah.
I think it's hard. I would not be surprised either way, honestly. Either way that the FDA might decide. My personal feeling is that there probably is a benefit for smokers to a product like Juul. But I also think it might be hard for Juul specifically to overcome the legacy it has built for itself that we're talking about. I mean, that company is just inextricably tied to the image that it's marketing towards teenagers and that teenagers use the product. And I think it's almost sad to me that a product that potentially could have been useful if marketed in the correct way is now tarnished to the point that, you know, they're seen as the teen e-cigarette. So for that reason, I wouldn't be surprised if the FDA doesn't let them continue to do business.
And what is happening with cigarette smokers? In other words, like, are we 20 years out from cigarette smokers being virtually non-existent in this country anyways? I mean, this is obviously not to get into, you know, the fact that basically these cigarette companies are now just basically exporting these problems to other countries and whatnot. But putting that aside for a moment, the need for, or the justification for e-cigarettes at this point seems to me to be exclusively for, because we know how detrimental this is to people's health, exclusively for people as a sort of therapy to get off of cigarettes, to mitigate harm. But how much of that harm is going to exist in 20 years, do you think? I mean,
yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. I think that's a great point. It is sort of an issue of diminishing returns, where I agree. The only possible use case for an e-cigarette is that it's better than a combustible cigarette. And each year we're kind of hitting new historic lows in how many people are smoking. So feasibly in a few decades, you know, that percentage is going to be vanishingly small, and there probably wouldn't be an argument to having a company like Juul on the market.
Well, Jamie Ducharme, the book is Big Vape, The Incendiary Rise of Juul. Folks can read your health correspondent at Time. Thanks so much for your time today, and we will put a link to your book at majority.fm.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you.
I think I said Time Magazine before, and it really, I mean, do they actually print it anymore? They
Yes.
do? Okay. Yeah, I don't know if anybody says magazine anymore.
Don't you remember who the Time Person of the Year was?
No.
I forgot.
Yeah, I don't.
I know. Well, it's very stupid.
Was it
but
Thomas Friedman?
It should be based on this op-ed, but it was Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah,
so,
same diff.
Yeah.
More or less. All right. Let's go right into it. I want to welcome back to the program Dr. MarkAlain Dery. He's an infectious disease specialist at AccessHealth Louisiana, also the host of the Noise Filter podcast, which can get you up to date on this on COVID and other related, I guess, COVID and COVID implications information on the reg. MarkAlain, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, Sam. Hello, Emma.
Hey, Mark.
So last time we spoke, I think we were sort of like in the Delta era, as it were. Now we're in the Omicron era. You're down in New Orleans. We are a month away from Mardi Gras and whatnot. Like, just give us an update on what's happening in New Orleans.
Sure. So we actually just probably peaked out probably 2 or 3 days ago, which was very nerve-wracking for all of us that were watching the graph. In fact, my wife had to call into City Hall every morning and had the y-axis adjusted. She was in charge of that project of the daily projections. And so she had to adjust the y-axis every day because the numbers just kept getting higher and higher. So I think we just recently peaked out. Yesterday, we did implement mask mandates again for indoors. So that's really good news because all of us, I think, want to see, although we were slightly nervous about Mardi Gras. We had a long conversation my wife and I did because we belong to several Mardi Gras crews, and we were trying to figure out, were we going to participate this year or not? A majority of these things are done outdoors, but they are crowded. So there is going to be some changes in how Mardi Gras is going to be done. The parade routes are going to be more uniform. They're going to be a lot shorter. Of course, that implies there could be more people clustered together, but they're really trying to respond to the fact that right now there's significant shortages in EMS and police staff as well. So those are the kind of things that we are thinking about. I think what we're going to see is a smaller, somewhat COVID modified Mardi Gras as we move forward. Hospitalizations are unfortunately going up here in New Orleans, and deaths are more or less stable. So I think we may have turned a corner.
Okay, so let's talk about that. And you're mentioning that the y-axis is going, has been going straight up like this, and it's not really moving forward, incrementally, obviously with time. But will you see? Do you anticipate seeing the same trajectory with hospitalizations, seeing as how hospitalizations generally lag 14 days out, and then deaths are 21 days out? Do you have a sense of what the relationship is going to be between those infections and the hospitalizations and the deaths at this point? Because we've been told that Omicron is supposedly milder. And I mean, is there some technical truth to that? And is it relevant, though, based upon the extra infections that Omicron is going to bring in that way? So, if 10 people die in scenario one because 20 people got infected, these numbers are not correct, but I'm just doing them simple, or 30 people got infected, it's still 10 people dying. And, you can't say Omicron is milder in terms of like the outcomes if that many more people are getting infected, and even if the ratio of people dying or getting sick is less.
Yeah, it's 100%. And you have lots of things in there. So I'm going to try to pick them apart one by one. Let me start by saying just this morning, I read a really interesting statistic that said that Omicron is as virulent as the original strain that emerged out of Wuhan, which is a really interesting way of thinking about it, because then we were super nervous about it, but we've had Alpha and we've had Delta. And when we say it's milder, well, let's put it into context. It's milder compared to Delta, but it's more on par with where we were with the original wild type strain. Now, we're not seeing the same amount of deaths as we did with wild type because more people are vaccinated. We have the use of monoclonal antibodies. And of course, it's only one of 3 monoclonal antibodies that are effective against this Omicron strain. And then lastly, we have the use of steroids. So those are the 3 things that we're really seeing that have been really, really helpful. But to get to the real point of the question that I think you're asking here, Sam, is that there are 7 studies. They were on animals and they were not on human studies, but they all say the same thing, that when you look at Omicron and you look at tissue from the bronchi, so here's your trachea, and it breaks off right into your lungs. Right at that first part of that break off into your lungs where the bronchia are, the virus reproduces very, very well. In fact, it reproduces 70 times more effective than Delta. So that's why you're able to cough it up, and that's why it transmits so much easier. But when you look deep in the lungs, right, deep in the where the air sacs are, it actually doesn't reproduce very well there at all. And that's probably another reason why we're seeing that there isn't as much virulence, and in other words, severity of disease with the Omicron variants.
That's interesting. Do we have a sense? I mean, the big thing I think that people have is like, do we have a sense of what the incidence of long COVID is, A, for Omicron, and then let's just, or we can go in the reverse order. Do we have a sense of what the incidence of long COVID was for wild type? I mean, for the wild type and for Delta? I mean, do we have data on this? Because I can never nail that down. Like as to how often people get long COVID, or even what the criteria is to establish that someone has long COVID.
Well, that's a different story. That makes it very difficult. That's why it's so hard to kind of really be able to make that diagnosis. But for adults and for children, it's the same. It's anywhere between 10 to 20%. Usually most people cut the middle and say 15% is usually the incidence that we see with long COVID. And the thing that scares me the most about any of these viruses, or variants rather, is the development of long COVID, because the people that I've seen personally who have had long COVID are really miserable. They are having very, very difficult time at it. And right now, a majority of what we see is a lot of CNS, central nervous system issues, depression, brain fogginess, forgetfulness, low energy. But the thing that concerns me is over time, we will hopefully not see this, but what I am concerned about is pulmonary and cardiac issues, so lungs and heart issues as well. So those are the things. Now, whether or not Omicron, an infection of Omicron, does that lead to increases in long COVID, or does it lead to long COVID? We don't know yet because it's still so new. But I would imagine that with so many people getting Omicron, I mean, this is likely one of the most infectious viruses that we've ever known. And with so many people getting it, we will probably see increases in the diagnoses of long COVID, but that'll probably happen in another month or so.
But what about these reports that we're seeing out of, I think the New York Times, but it was a CDC report published it the other day about children potentially seeing increase in diabetes type 1 and 2 due to COVID. What's your take on some of that data and the research that's being done there?
Yeah, Emma, it's such a great question. And I saw the headlines and I just kind of read the first couple paragraphs. So I'm sorry that I don't have a really, really good educational answer for that. The way that I interpret that is that, especially in children, if you disrupt the immune system or if you disrupt the homeostasis of the system, to the point where you are going to get a child sick, with COVID, that it doesn't surprise me that other disruptions in other homeostatic systems like the endocrine system, the hormonal system, could potentially occur as well. And so that's kind of how I interpret that. And I should look a little bit more closely, but I am embarrassed to say that I'm an adult doctor, so I usually focus on the adult research. But I did see that, and again, I just interpreted that as disruption of homeostasis.
All good. Yeah.
When we talk about long COVID, do we know whether being vaccinated in any way mitigates, implicates the idea of catching long COVID? I mean, obviously there's breakthrough cases, and what it seems to be clear, at least in the context of Omicron, is that if you're vaccinated, the severity of the short COVID, I guess, is generally less. Do we have any idea of how vaccination interacts with the idea of long COVID?
I don't know if there's any definitive studies out there that are able to answer that, but I will say that the folks that I do know that do have long COVID were vaccinated. But I want to go back and answer, kind of go back to the first part of that question there, Sam, because there's a couple things there that I think are really interesting. One thing that we do know, and something that we learned since the last time we talked in August, is that vaccination wanes over time. So hence this so-called booster. And I've always been talking about that. I think that the mRNA vaccines are going to ultimately be a 3-shot regimen with possible annual updates along the way, kind of like what we do with influenza. So the 2 shots, and after 6 months, immunization wanes. So that booster shot is so incredibly important. And what we have seen is that people who've been boosted have they have lower rates of getting COVID to begin with, and then the symptoms are less as well. Those rates are a little bit higher for people who have had 2 vaccines, and those rates are even higher for those that have had 1 vaccine, and the rates are higher for those that are completely unvaccinated. So very stepwise fashion like that. But the thing that I want to kind of remind everybody, because the thing that I hear about from my patients or people who say that they don't want to be vaccinated because you're still going to get Omicron or whatever, even if you are vaccinated, I just remind people the analogy that I always use. Vaccines are like seatbelts. A seatbelt obviously is not going to prevent you from getting into a car accident. But if you are in a car accident, that seatbelt is going to mitigate any injuries. And you have to think about the COVID vaccine as the same thing. The COVID vaccine is not going to prevent you from getting COVID. At one point, it did with the wild type strain, because remember, this vaccine was created with that wild type strain in mind. And of course, it has since, the variants have emerged one after the other. So we have to think of these as kind of being like seatbelts. It's not going to prevent you from getting COVID. So it's still important to mask. It's still important to social distance. But what we should see it as is that it mitigates the severity of disease, so that we know that hospitalizations are significantly less for people who are boosted.
And is it also not possible that the vaccine is also inhibiting other variants? Like, we hear stories of them finding a variant in France. I mean, we don't know that there aren't other, I don't know, epsilon and lambda and other Greek letters out there that would be a variant of an issue for us now or in the future, but for the vaccine, right? I mean, if the vaccine inhibited Delta on some level, it could be inhibiting other potential variants that we're not even aware of.
Sure. I mean, so there's a couple of things. One is that you still have so let's talk about the one from the south of France, IHU. So this is a new variant that's emerged from a man that came out of Cameroon and infected 12 people when he got back to south of France. Cameroon has a vaccination rate of 2.5%. So the vaccination rates are still so low in large portions of poor parts of the world, right? And so, especially in parts of Africa as well. And the other thing to consider too is that we haven't seen this yet, but certainly this is something that could happen, is that this virus also infects animals. So we could get to a point where you have somebody who has the virus, it goes to an animal, the animal then can have the virus, and then a variant can emerge from there, and then could potentially reintroduce it back into the human population as well. So this is why we'll never see an eradication of something like COVID, because it is because there is so many animal populations that COVID could infect as well. So what we are going to be looking to do or to consider is that we are going to be living with COVID, and hopefully as things progress, we're going to see the virulence of the virus, in other words, the severity of the virus, get less and less. Now, we're seeing it here with Omicron. Now, that's not, this is 1 point in space, right? 2 points make a line and 3 points make a trend. So I don't know if the next variant, when one does emerge, because one invariably will emerge, if that will become less virulent, and then the one after that becomes less virulent, and after that, and then we're starting to see endemicity kind of, we're creating that the virus becomes endemic into the population. And so that's ultimately where we want to go. But I'm not sure we're quite there yet. But Omicron certainly gives me, because I'm an optimistic guy, gives me the opportunity to kind of cross my fingers and hope that the next variants will continue to be less virulent, especially as we become more vaccinated.
Okay, so I want to just explore that optimism a little bit. Is that optimism is it founded in the idea that the more people, that there is a trajectory or momentum in terms of a direction of virulence? Does the existence of Omicron actually increase the likelihood that the next variant will be less virulent, or is it just it's still just like tossing a coin? Like it really doesn't make a difference if it was heads or tails last time. It's every time you flip it, it's a different thing.
Right. I mean, that's a really thoughtful question, because Omicron did not emerge directly out of Delta. They're on completely phylogenetic trees. They're completely separate. It's the one, they just kind of were the ones that popped and emerged and became successful from a virological perspective. So what this optimism is coming from, and Bradley, if you could pop up that infectious versus virulent graph that I sent you this morning, is that typically what happens, and I think we may have mentioned this before in the past, either viruses become more infectious and they move along that x-axis that we see there at the bottom, or they become more virulent as they move across that x-axis, or they become more infectious as they move up against the y-axis. But what you don't see are viruses that are really virulent and infectious, which is that one quadrant where it says more deadly there. That quadrant doesn't have any viruses in it, because they either go one direction or they go the other. They either become more infectious, they move up, they move horizontal against the x-axis, or they become more virulent. In other words, they become more deadly and they move up that y-axis. And so this is, I don't know if you remember this or not. This was from the Washington Post. This was the leaked document from the CDC from over the summer. And here you can see the SARS-CoV-2 Delta variant when compared to the pink box there, which is the wild type, that shifted more infectious and it shifted slightly more virulent. Right. So what we are seeing with Omicron right now is that ideally it's likely to become more infectious, but has dropped down a couple points on that y-axis and has become more infectious and less virulent. And so
closer to chickenpox. It's so closer to chickenpox on that.
I think, for me, I actually think that we're moving closer to we're moving closer to measles. I've not heard that, and this is my speculation, but I've never seen anything spread as fast. When I looked at the graphs today, we have globally the highest case rates that we've ever had nationally, and then here in Louisiana, all three graphs are peaking. You know, they're still continuing to increase. We're seeing record number of cases. Thank you, Bradley. I appreciate it. So I think this optimism is coming from a place of somewhat historical sense that that as viruses learn to become endemic into human populations, they become less virulent. Now, there's no rules that say they have to do it. We just observed it in the past, and I'm hopeful that with Omicron that we are seeing a trend forward. And this is, again, pure speculation. Fingers crossed that that's hope where we're going.
Is part of the reason why, if you move down that the axis of contagiousness, that it becomes less virulent, is part of the reason because we now have, even if Delta and Omicron are in different sort of like different species, if you will, for you know,
sure,
for lack of, you know, I'm a layman.
Sure.
That you're covering more sort of like between the number of people who've had Delta, the number of people who've had Omicron, and the number of people who've been vaccinated. You're sort of like that Swiss cheese that prevents you from getting it or getting sick from it gets denser and denser, as it were. We're overlaying more and more sort of like polarization, that it just starts to like, there's just less almost like oxygen or kindling for it. Like the more that we get, you know, that Omicron in some way is going to build alongside the vaccination and the Delta infections, and it's just going to make us a little bit more robust in our defense against any future variant.
Yeah, I think that is hopefully the direction that we're going again. You know, what we are seeing right now is we saw that it peaked out in DC. We saw that wastewater management in Boston is showing decreased viral loads because we're able to look at viral loads in wastewater. And so I think we are seeing such a rapid spike, and then it's peaking out. It peaked out in 2 weeks in South Africa. The same thing in UK. I think the word that I usually use is human wood. I think it's already it's run through the human wood because either people were protected from being vaccinated, maybe being naturally immunized, or being having a natural infection or natural immunization from being previously infected, and then of course all the other things that we have available to us to help mitigate, beyond vaccinations. Like I said, monoclonal antibodies and these new pills are going to be great. I think those are all different tools in the toolbox that we're going to have that ultimately, like you said, when you look at that Swiss cheese theory, that the more layers that you add onto it, the less virulent over time we're going to see. We're not going to see something like we saw last year in 2 years ago in 2020, where we were, for lack of better terms, a virgin population. We had no immunity whatsoever to COVID, but now we are building up these levels of immunity that, again, it doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. You'll get possibly a variant, but ideally two things. One, it'll be significantly less severe. And two, hopefully, it will not lead to long COVID issues as well. And we still don't know that second part yet.
What do you make about the dynamic now where we're finding more people, not more people, but there's more talk, at least, of finding people who are in the hospitals with COVID as opposed to in the hospitals because of COVID. And sort of tangential to that, when we look at hospitals that are pushed to the brink in terms of their capacity, which I imagine is diminished now relative to where it was 2 years ago because people are exhausted. You must be exhausted. You can't have probably more staff and nurses and doctors than you did 2 years ago. I would imagine, broadly speaking, across the country, hospital capacity is less. But when we look at the numbers of people who have COVID today, is that including a figure that also represents the average or typical number of people that are in a hospital? So if there's 100 people in the hospital today with COVID versus 100 people in the hospital with COVID in March of 2020. Is the number of people who are there today with COVID actually represent less of a strain on the hospitals, assuming the hospitals are at the same level of capacity, because the person who, because some of those 100 people of COVID are in there also for non-COVID related things.
Broken leg, heart attack.
Right. Whereas in 2020, those were distinct groups of people.
Yeah, no, I mean, so it's a good question. So one of the things that you're going to see epidemiologists looking at is specifically going to be looking at things that you could definitively measure: hospitalizations, people on oxygen, ICU beds. Those are things that are going to be very easy to measure. Looking at the number of cases are difficult, especially because we are mostly looking at PCRs. I'm not sure if they're including antigen or rapid testing. I don't know if there's a fudge factor for every 10 positive PCRs. Do they include 5 positive antigens? I don't know. I haven't heard or read that yet. But the number of cases that we're seeing is just so incredibly high. Again, this goes back to how infectious this virus is. But the point that you're making, I think, is one that needs to be underscored. There's so much COVID happening right now, especially asymptomatic COVID. And because people, the antigen tests are not sensitive enough to pick them all up, you're going to the hospital because you have a broken leg, you have a heart attack, you've got gallbladder issues, whatever the case may be. They're going to always swab you the minute you get into the hospital, and they're going to use a PCR test. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of asymptomatic COVID being transmitted. And so that's what we're seeing in the hospitals. But the minute you get a COVID diagnosis, you're going to a COVID ward, right? You can't be on the general hospital ward. Even if you're asymptomatic, they're going to still cluster you together. So there is still, utilization of services, because the COVID wards are very labor intensive. They're very PPE intensive. There's just a very, and people who are there, even if you're not needing oxygen, it's still a very labor intensive process. So what it shows me is that there's way more COVID out there, and the hospitals are picking them up because they have the PCR test to be able to spare or to utilize so that they can make those diagnoses. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So does that suggest that the number of COVID patients that we had 2 years ago or a year and a half ago was actually probably higher? But we just
no question. No question about it, because we didn't have enough tests to be able to determine if they had COVID or not. We were still using other things at that point. Finally, we had some tests, but even then the testing was still you had to have come from China, or you had to have had this, or maybe an exposure. They were still so rigorous testing. So there's no question that we missed a lot of cases early on.
I got to ask you this question just because it's out there. How much extra money does a hospital get when somebody has COVID? Like how much, because I'm looking at, and I certainly am not, I think providers, all due respect, I don't think this necessarily implicates you, but the providers, we need to put them, you obviously run a huge Medicaid, the biggest Medicaid provider in Louisiana. But I think we need to, ultimately we need to cut costs. We need to be able to put everybody under a rubric where we have some sensible pricing. But as far as I can tell, this is not a great time for the hospital business in terms of making money. But are people making extra money with COVID? Is that why they're reporting COVID?
I mean, I think the testing companies probably are, and maybe the insurance companies by denying care. But no, I'm not a hospital administrator. I don't think, I've read, and I've had to, I was never a big social media person, but I had to definitely step away from social media at some points, especially when they were like, the doctors are just saying it's COVID and so that you can get extra money. I've never seen or heard that. That's never been reflected in any of my billing. That's basically accusing me of fraud. And I'm not saying you're accusing me of fraud, but I'm just saying other people.
I just wanted the opportunity to address this because there's some lunatics out there who are convinced that this is just like
a doctor commits fraud, they lose their license. You spend, 5 years, 10 years preparing for medical school, 10 years for medical school and residency, and then you're going to call somebody to have COVID that doesn't make any sense at all. You lose your entire it doesn't make any sense at all. No, there's nobody's claiming fraud, and I don't think hospitals are sitting here making a lot of money on COVID. I think it's probably the exact opposite. And of course, this always speaks to the importance of a new healthcare system, one that is firmly implanted in a single payer system. But that's obviously a different thing. So I hear what you're saying. I've read what they've said. It does not match at all what happens inside a hospital at all. I've never heard or seen any of that happen.
Well, we're seeing the exact opposite. There's a clinic that maybe we'll cover this later in the show that was posing as a COVID testing site, but they were just giving all negative tests. I mean, like
those are the people who are getting rich, right?
Right.
Those are the people who are making money.
I am quite convinced there is some testing, I went into a bus up on Flatbush because I walked by and it was like COVID test, and I figure I'll get a rapid test and a PCR. And when I was done, I was like, when do I get the PCR results back? And they were like 5 to 7 days.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is a scam. This is a scam because that is completely worthless. 5 to 7 days. Are you kidding me? Like that is, it seems to me a test that's going to give you results 5 to 7 days is actually a detriment. It's worse. It's less than zero in terms of value, because I walk around, I'm like, well, I've been tested. Yeah. I don't have the results. Right. So I might as well just, I can interact with people. And I'm convinced that they're, that these companies have like some deal where it's like, with the lab, like, yeah, I want the discount, so no expediting of my thing, and they charge full price to the insurance company or whatever it is. But what
Sam, can I pivot real quickly just to something while we're talking about this? Bradley, can you put up that other slide I sent? I think this is something that's really confusing. I wanted to have the opportunity to talk about this. What you're looking at here is a graph here. At the bottom line, that pink line is the number of days it takes that you can detect with a PCR. And then above that, where it says detectable by lateral flow, that blue or black line there. So I want to just walk you through this graph to help you understand the difference between antigen and PCR tests, okay? And the reason why antigen tests aren't great, you could see there on day 0, you were exposed. On day 1, you start to create a bit of a viral load. And about day 1.5 to 2, you are now detectable by PCR. So if you go in early, you could see that it's not the case with antigen testing. You still need another day or so. So the reason why you have these people who go in and get tested with antigen tests, but they're negative, but their PCRs are positive, this diagram explains that. And the other thing that is super important, you could see that PCR is detectable for a lot longer period of time. The antigen testing is only detectable for a very, very short period of time. But the thing that's the most important, and the reason why people who are vaccinated and boosted and are not seeing positive antigens, but they may see positive PCRs, is that they never generated enough of a viral load. So their viral load was too low to be detected by antigen, but enough to be detected by PCR. And so this, I think, is a really good graph to help us understand why some people are testing negative by antigen, but positive by PCR. And it's probably in the last 2 weeks, the question that I get the most. So I just wanted to just use this as an opportunity to kind of to clarify that misunderstanding, especially for people who are vaccinated and boosted.
And just to be clear, the detectable by lateral flow is the home antigen test.
Yes, those are the antigen rapid tests. Lateral flow, antigen test, rapid tests are all the same.
Okay, and so and also just to be clear that you can show up on a PCR as positive and not have enough of a load to infect other people. Is that right?
No, we don't know yet. I hadn't thought about that. I would not be comfortable making that statement. I think that you would still be able to infect others, probably at much lower rates. Obviously, you can see how high those viral loads go, but I would still, that's why anybody who's positive, to continue wearing masking, social distancing, even if you've been boosted, you still may have a bit of a viral load, and you could still potentially transmit to others.
Okay, and just one more question on this, and just because this is, to me this seems somewhat obvious, but I talk to people who don't seem to quite get this. at any point on that, that curve there in the B area, as it were, or the infectious period, this is not an exact science insofar as our ability to detect where we are within that curve as an individual. So all we know is that if we layer on protections, whether that means a mask or the quality of a mask or the amount of time we spend with someone or the context in which we spend that time with someone, outside, inside, in a place with good ventilation or bad ventilation, and it's a combination of where we are on our arc of having this disease, et cetera, all of these things sort of like become a stew, and it's different for each person, but you can reduce your ability to infect other people. It can be like a gradation, right? I mean, this is like, you're just going, you can be in the gray area at any given time, and one tiny thing that you do to mitigate the exposure that you could get or your ability to transmit could make the difference.
100%, absolutely. Again, masking, social distancing. And what you bring up is you look at that B, okay? Look at that section B. Look at where the peak is. Now follow that down all the way to the bottom, the number of days. So that's 4.5 to 5 days since exposure. So it was really troubling when the CDC came up with the recommendation. Look where the original, it was 14 days, right? So you could see 14 days, you were pretty much out of the period of infectiousness, but nobody was doing 14 days or whatever. So they changed it to 10 days, and they went from 10 days to 5 days, largely because the UK did it for healthcare workers, because healthcare workers are getting Omicron at 20 to 25% increases. And these are boosted healthcare workers that have to take time off of work. So the UK was like, our healthcare system is not going to be sustainable this way. So we're going to do 5 day asymptomatic, 5 days negative antigen, wear a mask when you go to work. So the CDC a couple hours later adopted those same guidelines. And then you guys saw, I think you reported on it. And I think I heard you report on it when then the airlines started writing letters to Dr. Rochelle Walensky, and it became clear that they were like, well, if you're doing it for healthcare workers, we should do it for all workers. But, and you know, the idea is that you're still supposed to be masked. Well, two things. One is that people who are unvaccinated, that graph of infectiousness can go out to 10 or 11 days. So if you're unvaccinated, you could still be infectious up to 10 or 11 days. If you're also unvaccinated, you're unlikely to be wearing masks. You're probably of the belief that masks are not necessary. So the recommendation by the CDC, just by looking at this graph right here, you could see on its face was really somewhat troublesome, and I think is basically prioritizes profits over people. I mean, that's what it comes down to. America, the business of America is business, and so I think that there was a leaning toward prioritizing the economic system than it was prioritizing people's health.
And we have a similar dynamic, it seems to me, with the schools, but this is absurd. I mean, is this absurd? Because the fact of the matter is that, like, at the end of the day, it's one thing to say we're going to send, we're in an emergency situation and we need healthcare workers in the hospital, and they are the most vigilant when it comes theoretically to protecting others and themselves. And if they're asymptomatic and they're at the end of like they're right on the cusp, that we need to send them back in because the house is on fire and they're the only fire people that we have. But when it comes to schools, like, you can't change what the virus is going to do, and you're basically just saying we're going to ride this out. Right? I mean, isn't that basically what it is? We're just going to ride it out. My kid hasn't had a teacher for, he had a teacher for the first time in, 8 days. But
I spoke to a teacher yesterday. She said she went to school on Friday. There was no kids. That it had reached a point where every kid was completely quarantined and the entire school just consisted of teachers that were just in the building. This is unprecedented, And I think that the reason why you're seeing this return to school situation, I think is also the same thing, is that I think that the way that schools get reimbursed is if kids are attending classes. And I'm not a school expert, and I'm sure that a lot of listeners are school experts, but my very vague understanding is that it's better off for kids to be in classes from the perspective of administration, so they can get funded for that. And maybe what we really need to be doing is really focusing. And I know, and again, I'm not a parent, but I know, and I've heard from a lot of parents that that at-home schooling or the teleschooling is not ideal, but I think sending kids to schools only to have them go back home, I mean, that hurts everybody. I mean, our clinic system, we have lots of young mothers who are nurses and medical assistants or what have you, and the minute a kid gets sent back home, then they get pulled out, and then clinics start to, at least we've seen in our clinic system, like we have 35 clinics across the state that all start to get closed down, or we're not able to provide the services that are necessary because, moms or parents would be able to make the accommodations so that their kids could stay home and work from home to attend school. Maybe a grandparent or somebody else is there to do it while parents are at work. So it has become a mess. And I think that it's going to continue to do this for at least a couple of weeks more. We're going to be in this really, really messy time.
Let me ask you a question about, I think we're getting a sense of what your perspective is on the federal response at this point. But let me ask you this. What is your sense, and again, if this is something you don't want to answer, you don't have to, because this is, not necessarily a medical one, but it seems to me like a public health one. At one point, and this is not, I am completely agnostic. I have no idea as to Fauci's expertise or any of it. And I can understand, in my mind, at least I can work out why someone during the Trump era would say, I don't want to leave this job because if I leave, he could appoint Corey Lewandowski to replace me, or Jared, and that is a detriment to public health. But at one point, does someone say, fair or not fair, and I would say probably not fair, I have become a distraction. We have clip of Anthony Fauci saying to Rand Paul, I went to your website and you're fundraising off of me. Fauci has no control over that. But at one point, do you say, maybe I am the best thing for me to do for the public health of the country is to take my name out of the equation, so that because they don't have the resources to create a boogeyman out of MarkAlain Dery or Betty Stevenson, who's going to replace me. There's not enough time to build the machine. What is it your sense that maybe at one point, if you're becoming a distraction to sort of the federal response?
This morning, I read the stories and I saw the interaction with Senator Paul, and I think, was it Senator Johnson that he called a moron? I don't know who. I forget the name of this.
It wasn't Johnson, but
there were. There was a senator that was attacking him as well, and I asked myself this: who was it? I'm sorry.
Marshall.
Marshall. Yeah. So of course not Ron Johnson. My bad. But I asked myself, how does he still get up every morning and still just take this abuse and do this? And so where I would slightly push back a little bit, Sam, and say, I think that whoever they would put that job, that they would then go on the attack. And so I think that Dr. Fauci does feel, he's been doing this, since the HIV and AIDS era, really. He's been there, and he was, listen, I'll be honest with you, as infectious disease doctor, especially someone like myself who considers himself progressive, we were not big fans of Dr. Fauci through the HIV and the 90s eras. He pivoted a bit during the 2000 era. Certainly his response with Ebola was quite good, and the H5N1. He slowly got better, but his the early years, he kind of partook in some of the homophobia of the time and some of the racism that was associated with HIV. I'm not saying that he is a homophobe or he was racist, but he didn't push back against a lot of that verbiage in those days. Like he's pushing back big time now. You know, it would have been nice to see him do that early in the early HIV and AIDS days. But that being said, I think that they're going to create a boogeyman unless it is a Jared. But if you put a MarkAlain Dery there, you'd get the same thing. If you put a Rochelle Walensky, who's the CDC director, in that spot, you get the same thing. So I think that you're right. I've never seen him as a distraction, but I see where the question is coming from. But I feel very good knowing that he's there and watching him fight a bit more and kind of having him roll up his sleeves a little bit and pushing back a bit, because if you don't push back, you're going to just continue they're going to continue to pick on you. And because they're fundraising off of it. Every time Rand Paul, I'm sure Rand Paul's like, oh, we got Fauci today. Great. You know, give me some great talking points, because he knows he's going to get on TV and they're going to cover it. And you're right. It is a distraction. And I don't know what the right answer is there, Sam, quite honestly.
All right. Fair enough. All right. So lastly, let me ask you this, and I don't know if anybody else has got another question, but I just saw this report today, so you may not have caught up to this or may not know about it, but the stuff about the cannabinoids, the CBDA and the CBDG. I don't know if you've seen that report, but I'm curious to get your take on it if you have.
I haven't. I have not seen it. What, just saying that the cannabinoids are helpful, or
there was apparently there's a study that is done that I think has been peer reviewed. It's been done over the past 8 months that they found that
the NIH just posted on their site. So
in conjunction with the vaccination, that it inhibits the ability of the spike proteins to connect. I mean, it's pretty cursory, what they've written up there. So I haven't seen the actual report, but
so I will say this. So Sam, the last time we talked, we kind of ended on masking, and I wanted to kind of update the listeners on masking. Okay. So the last time we talked, you had just talked to Dr. Osterholm, and Dr. Osterholm in those days was still very, very, very pro KN95, N95 mask or what have you. And then we were still dealing with Delta, and I had made the point that just people masking enough is enough. Like you made the analogy of using like a seatbelt, the one that hooks up in your hip. At least it's not the ideal one that crosses, but at least it's a seatbelt and it works. And I thought that was a fair analogy. So with Omicron, there's no question now that KN95s and N95s are ideal. So if you are going out and about, so for me personally, here at the Dery Elliott household, we wear a KN95 and then we wear a cloth mask or a surgical mask over it, so as to not, so as to save the integrity of the KN95. It'll last a little bit longer. It won't soil as quickly, that sort of stuff. But it is important. I did want to kind of set the record straight from my previous statement, which was more geared toward Delta, Alpha, Wuhan wild type. Now with Omicron and probably new variant, I think that the integrity of the masks need to be better.
And we should say that apparently Bernie just introduced a bill with 50 co-sponsors to deliver everybody N95 masks.
Nice.
That's great.
So, well, I can't think of anything else at the moment, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and answering these questions for us. I know that our audience really appreciates it as well.
Maybe I could just ask if you could clarify one thing, and I almost hesitate to ask because it might sound stupid, and Sam touched on it earlier, but does this, and it is an addendum, so I apologize, but does the viral load that you receive directly connect with the viral load in numbers that you are putting out? Like if you have a milder case, is there evidence to suggest?
100%.
Okay.
100%. So it's all about viral load. So the higher viral load in HIV, Ebola, hepatitis C, hepatitis B, influenza, in this case, COVID-19, the higher the viral load, the more likely to have a more severe expression of the disease, and the more, the higher the ability to transmit to other people. So there is a 1-to-1 correlation on that.
Okay, just clarifying. Thank you.
And let me ask you about KF94s. Do you know anything about that, or is that
first I'm hearing about KF9? I think that they are made. I'm going to put it out there. I think they're made in Taiwan. I think that they're not unlike KN95s. I think. I read about something last week that was something about the mask, but I'm not 100% sure. But and if somebody was just asking about it, just to that listener, you want something that's going to fit tight across the face, ear loops that are tight, and that just has a fairly tight seal around it like that. And that's essentially what you want. So if it's a KN95, an N95, a KF94, which I think are made in another, I think it was Taiwan, but I may be wrong on that. That as long as it's tight fitting around the face, that's what you want. The N95s were meant to be like, I use N95s when I go and I evaluate somebody in the hospital and they've got TB or they've got measles, right? or something. And those N95s are tight and they're only meant to be worn for short periods of time. Now, when I go to the hospital, I wear an N95 and I wear a surgical mask over it, and I'm wearing it for 12 to like 14 hours a day, however long I'm in the hospital. And I've just kind of gotten used to breathing that way. But when I'm out and about, I don't use an N95. I just use a KN95, and those are equally as well. Again, they weren't meant to be used for long periods of time. So we're stretching the limit on those masks.
MarkAlain Dery, folks can check out the Noise Filter podcast, which is incredibly helpful. And I really appreciate you coming on. We will talk soon.
Thank you.
In the meantime, get some rest, well deserved to the extent that you can. And I hope, stay safe.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you, Emma.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks. Someone's saying that the KF95s are Korean. I'm not 100% sure, but look, if you're going on a plane, let's say, or you're going into a close quarters that you cannot avoid, and you're indoors, N95. If you're out and about, you're going into a store, let's say for 10 minutes, KN95. KF94 is probably okay as well. That's basically, what what your best practices are in that instance. But the bottom line is like, there is no, there is no sort of threshold where it's like, you're totally safe or you're totally unsafe. The more you do, you put your seatbelt on. A lap belt is better than no belt. A shoulder strap is better than just a lap belt. Having a airbag, better than not having an airbag. Driving, the speed limit, not driving on ice.
But you gotta drive.
Not driving on ice, if you could help. All of these things, we understand it in other contexts. It's the same in this context. It's just, what we don't fully understand is, and we really, do you really understand the risk of getting into a car accident? Like in terms of like what the odds are every time you get in the car, what they are to get into a car accident? No, but we just sort of like, we know that it's livable. The problem with, or the difficulty with COVID is that from day to day, we just don't know what the likelihood is that we're going to meet somebody who's infected, that we could get infected. As the variants change, the infectiousness of it changes. These are all unknowns. And anybody who is, whose job is to sit in front of a microphone and talk and tells you that they know, or that, someone's being too cautious, is an idiot. And they don't have your best interest in mind.
I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but I have this COVID-induced fantasy that when I'm in like a grocery store or something, that's I would like, how you guys know how the Sims would have like a something that would float above their head telling them their mood, like it'd be red if they were needing food or needing to go to the bathroom. I have that fantasy of like, this person's COVID positive, stay away from them.
I mean,
I wish that was my superpower.
Oh, that would be, yes, that would be awesome if you could see it actually.
Yeah.
But I mean, broadly speaking, I just try and limit the amount of time I'm in any one place. Obviously, to the extent that I can. If I'm going into a store, I don't like linger around the produce.
Right.
As it were.
In and out.
We will clip that interview. Yes, we always do. We will clip that as soon as possible. We'll put that out quickly. Dorsey will get the message. Folks, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only support the free show, but you also get the fun half as well, which will be a little truncated today. But,
we needed that.
We needed that. That guy, unbelievable the amount that he works. I mean, just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And I can't even imagine. But thank goodness for him. Really appreciate him coming on and check out the noise filter. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian media universe?
Tonight Daniel Bessner will be joining Left Reckoning to talk about his piece on the end of politics, and Jean Bajalan, so two DBs, Jean Bajalan will be joining us to talk about Erdogan, Gulen, and to set the context for Enes Kanter and his sort of politics. We're going to take another pass at that because Kanter is a Gulenist, and we're going to figure out what that means. And if we should be a little bit more, and I feel a little bit bad at how hard I went at Kanter for his political statements, even though they were dumb, and like the saying "shut up and dribble" to like LeBron and stuff was dumb. But he's like a 30-year-old kid that's been playing basketball and has had like run-ins with like Erdogan. So I want to get the full context. That's tonight. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get the post game.
He doesn't seem like the brightest bulb.
I mean, I wouldn't be either if I was a professional basketball player, and like I'd spend a lot less time following politics, frankly.
Yes.
Oh, come on, Matt. If you were a professional basketball player, you'd just be much better at basketball. That's all.
You'd be careening at Matt.
I'd still be listening to like audiobooks, and I think I'd be slowing down a little bit on the news intake though.
But at least he's no a-hole like Djokovic.
And I mean,
right?
I would yes, but
I just wanted to be able to say Djokovic, right?
Well, you got it right.
Thank you.
Before the show, Sam's like, Jokic, Jokic?
Yeah.
There's an extra.
He's the center for the Nuggets.
Yeah, right.
Folks, see you in the fun half. 646-257-3920.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
We bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males.
Psych. Fuck them. Snowflake says what? What? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Bracing himself on the.
We are back.
Oh, sorry.
We are back.
Just talking about the Kodak Black incident, everybody.
Welcome back. It is the fun half of the program. Robin from Dedham. Rob from Dedham. Don't know if you touched on it, but former Mass Attorney General and 2012 Democratic gubernatorial candidate Martha Coakley became a lobbyist for Juul after she lost the governor's race. With friends like this, who needs enemies? Oy. Unbelievable. God, I just don't understand. I just don't understand how people do that. Really just don't understand. Kostupu. Such cynical BS politics there with Biden. Why wait a damn year? Absolutely sick. Hannah. Hi, Sam and Emma. Yesterday you read out an IM regarding Australian refugee centers, which I thought you were dismissive of.
We were talking about... No. That is in reference to the Djokovic thing. Where he was in it's not a refugee center. He was in some sort of like holding.
Amnesty International has raised a lot of concerns about treatment of people in these centers. I don't even remember that IM at all.
Yeah, this has got to be about the Djokovic situation.
Oh, yeah, I think you may have misinterpreted, or we may have misinterpreted.
He was held because of his vaccination status. So.
And I think we laughed at the idea that he would take this opportunity to shine a light on refugee centers, which I don't know Djokovic terribly much, but my sense is that he's not the type of person who would do that.
No. He's a huge asshole.
Chantel, Sam, I love you for what you do, so I want to ask you about a debate I recently had. Basically, it's about Tesla self-driving. I was asked by my brother on why self-driving should not be adopted right away since it will be saving lives. Granted that it's not flawless and is risky, but it will lead to less deaths than human error while driving, and if so, shouldn't it be subsidized by the government? Why should we wait until near flawless self-driving to implement it on the road if scores are dying due to human error? Well, I think there is a widespread belief that if scores are dying due to human error, you're going to have scores upon scores dying.
Yeah, there's no self-driving. Self-driving doesn't exist yet. Like even Tesla, who is not like, if it existed, Elon Musk would have that in there, and he'd have a whole fleet of like Ubers that, you know, right? Like it doesn't exist right now. They're saying you have to be very attentive to what your car is self-driving in case it, for instance, decides that train tracks are another road.
Yeah, I'd rather just drive.
Well, but even putting that aside, the point is, the way that you or your brother has framed this is wrong. If it was the case that self-driving cars saved lives, I would certainly be, I mean, I don't know if I would be in support of subsidizing it because by the government, because I
invest in public transit.
I would prefer them to.
Cars?
Yeah, I would prefer. You know, we're subsidizing, let's say, self-driving. I don't know, buses or trains. But the point being, I would be in fully promoting self-driving vehicles if they worked, but they don't.
Yeah, if it turned out that you could train a computer to look at a video screen and drive a car for you, and that was super easy, which people thought it would be, like maybe in 2005, 2006, then that'd be great and it'd save lives. It's not that.
I also want to add that if we had the technology right now to have wastewater propel hovercrafts, I would also support that.
I mean, this whole self-driving conversation needs to be looked at for what it is. It is floated by guys like Elon Musk to get more investor money. And they always fudge the numbers on how close that tech actually is.
Yes. And it's a big problem when our entire sort of future technological imagination is driven by these sorts of charlatan impresarios.
Now, Hyperloop, that I'm on board with.
Oh, yes. Did you see those videos?
Yeah, we played this.
Oh, you played it while I was gone?
Yes, we
Oh
did,
my
of course.
God. There are single lane tunnels, people responding in France or in Europe. There's a place to at least get off if there's an accident.
Yeah.
What the hell is
Matt
this?
says, too. It's like basically being locked into a
It's like getting an MRI. I mean, it's giving me like, what do you call? I'm getting claustrophobic just looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take this moment. People got mad at me because I suggested that Tesla fires catch on fire, and they pointed out that actually they catch on fire a lot less than the internal combustion engine, which is good for them. But they still do catch on severe fires that take a lot of firefighters to put out. And I'm sorry, you can't be overstepping those safety concerns with tunnels. And especially if this guy is going to be, again, this mascot for technology, when, I'm sorry, like Emma said, Europe and other places around the world, they make tunnels. Like, it's not like Elon Musk is inventing the wheel here with his like boring stuff. They do tunnels better than we do.
Just at the transportation museum, they had an exhibition, I don't know, this a couple of years ago, of the secret, what was it called? Some guy had basically developed, like, it was like a tunnel with a subway car. I mean, at least that thing would move more people. All right. I don't want to spend too much time on that. It's silly. Sweaty sack. I wonder how Rogan will deal with the Seder Day combined with the Vax article, calling dibs on the band name Axis of Contagiousness. Ground report. Sam, Emma, do you think Jordan Chariton and Status Quo can redeem themselves by doing work they're doing now? Real deep interviews with nurses, union members, and even the January 6th Inside the Capitol coverage was epic.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what that means. I mean, I've never doubted. I don't know. I don't want to speak on it.
Emma's probably a little bit close to it.
Yeah.
I appreciate some of the work that he's doing now, but we're probably, there's a lot of other outlets that can provide this stuff that it's probably not, we're not necessarily in the best position to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I never question that. That kind of work that we did, which is very similar, I think, for what they're doing now. I think it has a lot of value. Just I question the ethics of some of the people there.
Yes, Sebedagi. Little late for mailing out the masks, eh? Yes and no. And the point that, like, it ain't going to hurt. That's like, yes. Should we have mailed out the masks 2 years ago? The answer is yes. At one point, the Postal Service was going to do it, was going to deliver the masks. Even if you deliver one mask, it would have gotten the message to enough people that, like, hey, there is some, official endorsement of wearing masks, and that would have been good. But if we do it yesterday or we do it tomorrow, it's still going to be better than not doing it tomorrow or yesterday. That's not fraud. Even Biden is getting in on the Obama cadence impression. Remember when Anna Navarro said Bernie Sanders didn't get her presidential love juice flowing? All-timer MR YouTube clip. I remember your guest at the Tort Convention saying Juul undid a generation of positive trends toward youth smoking cessation. Yep. Rockstar should mod those explosive Tesla fires into Grand Theft Auto 5. Dolink. Research about CBD is predominantly whole plant CBD, not hemp CBD. Hemp CBD is not potent enough to be therapeutic. CBD and THC are just two of the more than 150 cannabinoids found in the cannabis plant. Every 2 weeks, the International Association of Cannabis Medicine publishes a free newsletter. The latest research, the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, provides ongoing educational opportunities to anyone, especially medical personnel, about therapeutic use. There's tons of research ongoing, but it's almost always on the whole plant. It's out there. Yes, I was just referring to this specific study. I'm not quite sure what the deal is. I don't get a sense. Sebadazi's nuts. Sam, you should all look into what is into Sebean. It's cannabidiol. It's a product of aged cannabis that's actually beneficial for deep sleep. Worth looking into. It's helped myself tremendously through the stress of this 2-year crap show. Quiet Joe Biden. When president feels like it's necessary to wait to do the right thing, what does that really say? Walrus. Hey, Emma and Matt. Thoughts on Jonathan Isaac leaning into being a full grifter now? You seem him with Benny Shapiro.
Well, he was a part of that Welcome to Florida video for Dave Rubin.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad.
Who's Johnny? Who's Johnny?
He's the Magic player who isn't getting vaccinated for religious reasons.
Oh, good for him.
Because he's previously had the COVID too, apparently, and wants a special exemption.
So Donald Trump went on NPR. Didn't work out so well. Although I imagine, like, I would be willing to bet 25% chance that the plan was, let's hang up on this guy.
Yeah. Or maybe he thought it was the NRA. That's why he was pumped about it.
I just remember there was a bunch of letters, and I can't remember what they were. Here he is with Steve Inskeep.
In fact, they say, and I can't testify because it's been through a lot of systems, a lot of different systems, but they say, and they say very strongly, the judges nobody's really gotten a chance to look. Look at the United States Supreme Court. They refused to hear the case. And you had,
They said there was no standing to give the
suing.
case. That's correct.
Well,
Can I just
no
ask?
standing. I know. No standing. And the President of the United States supposedly didn't have standing either. So I wanted to file it myself. They said, sir, you don't have standing. I said, wait a minute. I'm the President of the United States. They just rigged an election. Hundreds of thousands of votes in different states. They just rigged an election. We got a number of votes that I think you'll agree no sitting president has ever gotten a number of votes that I got. No sitting president has ever gotten. Sitting president. Nobody believes. You think Biden got 80 million votes?
It's true.
I don't believe
it's true that you got more than any sitting president in the election you've disputed.
How come he couldn't?
If I can, Mr. President.
Let me ask you this question. How come Biden couldn't attract 20 people for a crowd? How come when he went to speak in different locations, nobody came to watch, but all of a sudden he got 80 million votes? Nobody believes
If you'll forgive me, maybe because the election was about you. If I can just move on to ask, are you telling Republicans in 2022 that they must press your case on the past election in order to get your endorsement? Is that an absolute?
They're going to do whatever they want to do. Whatever they have to do, they're going to do. But the ones that are smart, the ones that know, you take a look at how Carrie Lake is doing, running for governor. She's very big on this issue. She's leading by a lot. People have no idea how big this issue is, and they don't want it to happen again. It shouldn't be allowed to happen, and they don't want it to happen again. And the only way it's not going to happen again is you have to solve the problem of the presidential rigged election of 2020.
Mr. President, if I'm... Wait, one more question. I want to ask about a court hearing yesterday on January 6th. Judge Mitt, he's gone. Okay.
He just hung up?
I get the last word. Goodbye. Goodbye.
The rigged election of 2020.
You say the election was about me? What are you implying?
He did not subscribe to the NPR droning tones. He just went in like with his normal candor or normal tone of voice. He totally did bulldoze that.
Oh yeah, Inskeep was getting completely
Why is he conceding these points to him? Like, I mean, he wants to get the interview back on track, so he's like, yes, sir, you're right. You did get the most votes of any sitting president, but like leaves out the. I mean, what is the value of interviewing him if you're just going to like to give him the points that he desires to make it seem like he won the election.
I don't know. What do you say in that situation? Yes, it's true. You did get the most votes of any losing president in the history of.
I mean, you say you lost, like, yeah.
Except for the fact that Joe Biden did not get those votes. So.
Wow.
There you go.
Hang up on me now.
Click. Click. We mentioned this Fauci thing. Here is Fauci with Rand Paul. And, let's play this clip. We brought this up with Dr. MarkAlain Dery, and I can understand his point, but let's play this clip, and then I'll make my point about Fauci here.
The last time we had a committee, or the time before, he was accusing me of being responsible for the death of 4 to 5 million people, which is really irresponsible. And I say, why is he doing that? There are two reasons why that's really bad. The first is it distracts from what we're all trying to do here today, is get our arms around the epidemic and the pandemic that we're dealing with.
1 second. I just want to be clear. He's talking about Rand Paul, right? And this is obviously a Senate hearing that took place yesterday. And it's the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee hearing. All right, go ahead.
Number two, what happens when he gets out and accuses me of things that are completely untrue is that all of a sudden that kindles the crazies out there, and I have threats upon my life, harassment of my family and my children with obscene phone calls because people are lying about me. Now, I guess you could say, well, that's the way it goes. I can take the hit. Well, it makes a difference because, as some of you may know, just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, on December 21st, a person was arrested who was on their way from Sacramento to Washington, D.C. at a speed stop in Iowa. And the police asked him where he was going, and he was going to Washington, D.C. to kill Dr. Fauci. And they found in his car an AR-15 and multiple magazines of ammunition because he thinks that maybe I'm killing people. So I ask myself, why would Senator want to do this? So go to Rand Paul website, and you see Fire Dr. Fauci with a little box that says, contribute here. You can do $5, $10, $20, $100. So you are making a catastrophic epidemic for your political gain. So the
you have politically attacked your colleagues and in a politically reprehensible way attacked their reputations.
Okay,
you won't defend it. You won't argue it. You'll just simply turn around the attack.
We're going to continue this hearing. We have a number of questions.
All right. Now, let me just say this first. Anything that shows Rand Paul to be the disingenuous, moron, charlatan that he is,
POS.
I am all in favor of. And I think there is value in showing at least a certain portion of the country how they are literally, been using this as a mechanism in which to fundraise. But at one point, I just think that, and it is definitely the case, that whoever is going to be sitting where Fauci's going to be sitting, they're going to attempt to fundraise off him and demonize and whatnot. But I do think that if I'm Anthony Fauci, I got to look and say, I'm here to help the country get through this pandemic. And is the fact that I have unfairly or fairly, it doesn't matter, been turned into a boogie person, helping or hurting the country? In my sense is, it's not fair and this and that. There has to be at least one other person in the country who is qualified to do what Fauci is doing at this point, even if they're just figurehead, and Fauci's able to advise them. Like he's got some type of like, I don't know, mentee or something. Yeah. But there's no way that they're going to be able to create another boogeyman like Fauci after Fauci. And so I got to think that at one point the guy's got to step aside and say, like, for the sake of this pandemic fighting effort, it is better if they don't have me to kick around anymore, whether it's fair or not fair, because, you know. And
I understand the impulse to fight back in that instance, because, of course, you feel threatened, your family feels threatened, and you want to say, screw this complete, you know, psycho. I'm going to fight back and I'm going to stand up for myself. But then you're, as somebody who's a public servant, then you got to say, all right, well, then this has become personal. And a lot of maybe why he, I think, feels emboldened to fight back in that way is because there's a Disney Plus documentary about him. You got, you know, the whole, I mean, there has become, well, he's become bigger. He's become but I think representative of something for a section of liberals, and it's not productive anymore.
Well, I don't have a problem with him fighting back. I actually think that's good for him to do. But once you've done that, then maybe say, like, you know, and now I'm done. Because I mean, I think he should fight back. I don't think in fact, what I'm suggesting is completely distinct from his response whatsoever. It is unfair to him, or it's fair to him. It doesn't. I'm completely agnostic on that. On some level, it's just like the fact of the matter is, there has been a cottage industry. People are making money off of demonizing this guy, and again, there's no doubt that Rand Paul and all these other lunatics would start to do this if it was, you know, Matt Leck or Emma Vigeland or Betty Thompson. It doesn't matter. I just made up the name Betty Thompson. But there's only a certain amount of time. There's only a certain amount of resources. And it's also harder to demonize the second person sitting there without it just people going like, hey, wait a second. You know, they demonized, regardless of what you think about Hillary Clinton one way or another, it is simply a fact. There was 30 years of demonization of Hillary Clinton. Some people might say, oh, deserve it. Some people might say completely undeserved. It doesn't matter.
Still lost you the election.
I'm just talking about
the reality.
That reality. And they couldn't do it with Joe Biden. And all I'm saying is, at one point, Fauci's got to say, I'm going to take an assessment. Have they successfully demonized me in such a way, unfairly or not, that I am now a distraction in this fight? And it's hard for me to imagine that someone couldn't look at that and make that assessment. And yes, does that mean that they won? Well, I don't care.
Well, they won in the interpersonal battle, but that's not what is.
That's not the issue here.
Right.
The issue
well, I mean,
is
then we should just also play the hot mic thing.
Oh, yes.
So
and now, with that said,
yeah, I mean, this is another thing. So Fauci was caught in the hot mic, ripping into a Republican senator, completely deservedly so. But here he is. Which clip is this, Bradley?
It's number 8.
Oh. Oh yes. He was caught in the hot mic calling Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas some names.
Yeah, here he is. This is the Senate Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee hearing, again, chaired by Patty Murray. And Fauci's just been questioned by this ding-dong, who is, in all fairness, actually a fucking moron. But here it is.
Look, you are totally incorrect.
Well, we look forward to reviewing it. Senator Marshall, Dr. Fauci has answered you. It is public information, and he's happy to give it to you if you would ask. Senator Moran.
What a moron.
I mean, maybe he knew that would be picked up.
I don't know. But yes, is a moron and Jesus Christ. I mean, I don't think that Fauci would be saying Jesus Christ if he thought it was going to be picked up. But yeah, I mean, and these people are morons. They're idiots, and that's the best case scenario, right? Like, it's even worse if they actually know what they're doing. But yes, they're so stupid. Some of these people are just so stupid. But sadly, we live in this country and it is effed up, and they successfully turned Fauci into a boogeyman, and regardless of how fair or not fair it is, the bottom line is you want to end this pandemic as quickly as possible, and you got to make an assessment. Is having Fauci being the voice of the federal response helpful at this point?
Is that Biden's call? Could Trump have fired Fauci?
That's a good question. I don't know what the relationship is in terms of the NIH, if that is like some type of, but it seems to me that
my recollection was no.
There is enough of a relationship, I would imagine, where a Democratic president could say, like, I mean, I can understand, like, Fauci during Trump, like, I'm not going to quit because it's going to be Corey Lewandowski or, Boris Epstein is going to be the new head of the NIH. But
the transition would have been a maybe good opportunity, or last summer. I mean, like, I agree. I think I've been saying this for a while that I think he's too much of a distraction. But I think, like, now it's in the height of this sort of moment. It might look like a capitulation that gives momentum to the right, and that, like, it would have been better at a moment like a low period or like the transition.
And how? I mean, and then the other. This is incalculable, but the people that already think Fauci's a bad guy, or are they too far gone?
I mean, maybe, but it's just less evidence. It's just less evidence.
It's certainly not helping to have him up there, and it may also not be hurting either. But I think it's obvious it's not helping.
I'm trying to put this delicately.
What?
My daughter, during when she was visiting relatives for Christmas, sent me a text. Should I read the real Anthony Fauci book? Because someone is suggesting I read it. They're trying to get me to read it. And I'm like, there's a lot more things I would like you to read before you get to that one. Yep.
Oh, that's his book?
Yeah, it was RFK's book.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. Super, believe me, extremely sad.
Can we do 10?
Yeah, what's 10?
It's the fake COVID testing thing.
Oh, yeah, let's do this. This is crazy, and people should be aware of this. I am very skeptical about a lot of the pop-up tests that we're seeing around here. They come in for they give you a rapid test, and then they give you a PCR test that doesn't come back within 5 to 7 days. It is useless.
Yep.
It is absolutely useless. There's no doubt in my mind that is some type of scam where they go, we're going to send this to the lab. There is probably, my guess, and this is complete speculation on my part, where the lab says you have 2 tiers of service that we give. Normal response time or slowed response time? Which one do you prefer? I'll take the slowed response. It's cheaper. They make the delta between, forgive the pun, between they arbitrage what they're getting from the insurance companies and the delayed response, because a 5 to 7 day response on a PCR test has as much worth as me putting my hand over this camera and feeling your forehead in terms of being able to tell you.
Although you should be able to do that with the 5G, but.
Yeah, exactly. But here is the report from Wink News. It's a local station in Fort Myers, Florida, reporting on a couple who received COVID tests. And to be fair, they got their PCR results very, very quickly.
Yes. This lab must have been on it.
Erin Cates is a wife, okay? She's a mom too, and she's COVID positive. But see, she knows that now. She didn't know it when she got in this line.
I know this is not the point, but like,
It's most important to be a mom and a wife.
It's Aaron Cates is a wife.
Yeah.
And a mother, too. How about she's a person?
Yeah.
She's a person.
Well, I think I need more context to care about her. What does she mean for the men in her life, though?
Just so you know, she's good enough to be married.
She's not a weirdo.
Yeah, so this is a pretty serious story. But, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry to be so nitpicky, soy boying out on this. Go ahead.
Her husband, Doug, and their 3 kids were in search of a test when they saw the signs along 41 in Bonita Springs.
There was just kind of like almost like an election advertisement type sign, like a plastic sign that sits in the ground that says COVID testing this way. And I think it even said free COVID testing.
In line, they were told to grab one of these doctors' clinical lab cards, scan the QR code, and enter their names, address, a picture of their driver's license, and all of their personal insurance information.
When we went to CenturyLink, they didn't need all that information.
But the Cates filled out the card anyway. While they were in line waiting for a test, they got a notification that their results are ready. Results of a test they were still in line to take.
We got an email for each of us, all 5 of us, both of us and our 3 kids, saying that our rapid test came back negative.
The Cates told me other people in line got the same exact message. Aaron and Doug did not like that one bit.
So, I confronted the man. I asked him how this happened.
So they emailed Wink News, and I started to investigate. First, I tried to call Center for COVID Control. That's who sent Aaron and Doug the notification that their test results came back negative.
You are currently caller number 121.
It said our wait time was 5 minutes, and then 6 minutes, and then 8 minutes. I gave up after 40 minutes. I was getting nowhere. I went back to the card the Cates filled out, looked up doctor's clinical lab. I found one ending in .net and another ending in .com. I called the .net number first. A spokesperson from the Miami-based company told me. So the Doctors Clinical Laboratory Services that is using your logo and name on the west coast of Florida in several locations is not a part of your entity.
Exactly. It's not a part of us at all.
So when I looked for a number to the .com.
Well, there it is.
I mean, there's a part 2, but did we not get that? Nah, if you want it, we don't need to finish.
Yeah, I get the point. Just be careful out there. And honestly, if a PCR tells you they're not going to get your results, and ask them beforehand.
Yeah.
Because I made the mistake of just looking at the sheet, which said 1 to 2 days. But when I went back, after I took the test, they said 5 to 7 days. Ask them up front. There's no point. You're doing yourself harm. If they're telling you 5 to 7 days, there's, first off, just being in that testing center is probably more risk than any benefit that you're getting out of the situation. Because people who tend to go to these testing centers tend to think they might have COVID.
Yeah. This place is called the Center for COVID Control. Newsweek picked it up, and there's apparently an investigation. People are looking into it for the Better Business Bureau has dropped the company's rating to F. But it seems to be more widespread than just Florida there.
I would imagine.
And
yeah, that's accountability. We'll get them with the Better Business Bureau grade.
Yeah, but it is
medical fraud.
But it is just there really does not seem to be much oversight. As we're talking about here in New York City, you can't get a PCR test unless you want to pay for one of those boutique services, right?
Yep.
Say you want to get
$200 or something.
I don't even want to say, the location I'm at with my insurance, it's free for me for a PCR back to 10 to 12 hours. But those mobile pop-up places where everyone's getting tested, you have no idea what the oversight is and when you're getting them and what. So just look into these companies.
Yeah, it's insane right now. It's insane the way they handle this. It really is.
And you just wonder. I have no evidence to suggest this, but you wonder if there was some sort of handshake agreement with maybe the manager of that clinic where somebody wants negative results back to go places. They want to be able to pass a COVID test. You're hearing about people putting Vaseline up their nose in order to pass COVID tests and have it come back negative. I really, really wonder what maybe is going on at this COVID testing facility for that purpose.
It's like Djokovic, right? Pretended like he didn't have COVID and goes out and...
Yeah.
Let's talk about this guy.
I'm sorry, just that happened literally on a plane from JetBlue from Canada. Kids put Vaseline up their noses so they could still go to Mexico for New Year's Eve, and they took all of their masks on and were drinking on the plane, and I think 30 people on the plane got COVID, and JetBlue canceled their flight back.
There was an issue with India earlier in the pandemic in the first year that they were supposedly testing people before they get into flights, but they all got to like Thailand or somewhere, and everybody basically had COVID because the tests were fake, and they're just, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, I think like conspiracies to commit fraud like this, I think, are definitely widespread.
And like the story of Djokovic is the tennis player who knew that he had COVID, goes to an interview and a photo shoot. I just think that's the most despicable thing that you could possibly do.
I know.
I just don't understand how people can function in that way.
Well, he's been one of the 3 best tennis players in the world for 20 years, like him, Federer, and Nadal. So he's above it all.
I'm really good at tennis. So if I end up killing somebody, I'm really good at tennis. Here is 2 Australian news anchors who, God, I do have Australians I love. I just, in generally, I love. And I suppose it's conceivable that 2 American newscasters would talk like this after the news is off, but I doubt it. I just think that Australians, broadly speaking, your average Australian versus your average American, they're just more savvier. They're savvier about the news, and they're I don't want to say they're better, because I'm an American, and that would also
well, they're certainly better than
me.
They're certainly better than British people. I'm joking.
Here is these guys from Melbourne.
Novak Djokovic is a lying, sneaky
He's an asshole.
He
is an asshole.
Like, whatever way you look at it, it's unfortunate that everybody else stuffed up around him.
That's it. I mean, he's an asshole.
Like, to go out when you know you're COVID positive. Well, I don't think he was even COVID positive. I don't think that form is true.
He got a bullshit fucking excuse and then fell over his own fucking lies, which is what happens, right?
Yeah.
That's what's happened.
And then him now then ticking, he didn't go to Spain.
Yeah.
It's just like...
Yeah. But I think he's going to get away with it.
Well, he is going to get away with it.
Yeah.
But he's...
I think most fair-minded people would say, look, the bloke's an arsehole. Did they do the right thing by him? I don't know.
No, I don't.
They fucked it up.
Yep. Got to appreciate that. I couldn't, I mean, yes, what an asshole.
Yep. Asshole.
I mean, I suppose it's possible there are American anchors who would talk that way back and forth, but I don't know. Those guys are good. I spent a month or 2 in Melbourne.
I know. That's when
It's
you
fun
would
time.
sell movie tickets.
No, I would sell the movie tickets actually in Sydney and up the East Coast. East Coast or West Coast? East Coast.
Did you ever? Why were you in Australia?
Just traveling around. Just working. Just traveling.
Okay.
I did go to a
Sounds like you were
4-day test
assassinating
match.
someone or something.
I was there for the CIA, of course.
Obviously.
Back, I went to a 4-day test match, and they had just, and this is 30 years ago now, they had just passed a really controversial rule in the stadium where you could only bring in 1 case of beer per person.
Oh my God.
And there was a lot of controversy around that. And when they did the wave, they threw up beer cans.
That's
and it was awesome to watch it go around the stadium like a swarm. It's pretty cool.
Sounds safe.
I mean,
can you? I mean, that is like the more the atmosphere you want. Like when I went to the Giants game earlier in in September, they stopped serving beer after halftime.
Well, I've been to a Giants game, and
that stadium is a shithole.
It was justified. I went there with my
Worst
daughter.
football stadium
My
built in
daughter
the
and
past
I
20 years.
saw a Patriots Giants game. I think it was an exhibition game. I can't remember though, to be honest with you.
They play every preseason.
And it was like 3 or 4 years ago. So my daughter's like 13, 12. For her first football game, she put the black stuff under her eyes. She had her Gronk jersey on. She was extremely exuberant in terms of cheering. The Patriots won. And as we're leaving, 2 women in their 30s go like, don't you have any morals? You can root for that team, the Cheetahs? And they're yelling at my daughter, and a 12-year-old girl. So,
yeah, I mean, look, whatever. We haven't even gotten into the fact that the Giants fired their coach yesterday, but it's
whatever.
Cleaned house.
Somebody called in about this, or IM'd yesterday, about a bill that is being debated in Indiana. And, I mean, think about the ink and the oxygen expended on the idea that there were college students, not lawmakers, not college administrators, as if college controls anything but lawmakers. Think about all of the ink and the oxygen that was expended on talking about speech codes, and people are being too politically correct, or they're being too woke, or they're being whatever it is, and how that endangers freedom. And it's all authoritarian. And then compare that to the ink and the oxygen being expended upon this debate in Indiana.
Stand up and say who we voted for or anything like that, but we're not neutral on Nazism. We take a stand in the classroom against it, and it matters that we do.
I'm not discrediting as a person Marxism, Nazism, fascism. I'm not discrediting any of those isms out there, and I have no problem with the education system providing instruction on the existence of those isms. I believe that we've gone too far when we take a position on those isms as it relates to, we need to be impartial. Again, I'm going to use this term. We need to be the purveyors of reason. We just provide the facts. The kids formulate their own viewpoints.
So in other words, no editorial on, let's say, fascism. No editorial on fascism or Nazism or
Marxism. I mean, that's the thing. They put that together, right?
That's the problem that I have is like, this is, if you guys are going to do this socialism, Marxism stuff, we get to do fascism. That's what is underlying all of this stuff here. Like that's ultimately where fascism came from in like the Hitler version, right? Like we're a part of the pitch was, we're the only ones that can stand up for you capitalists that Hitler gave to German businesses. And like, I think that's why we're seeing a lot of this Nazi stuff now.
And not just German business,
socialism.
Not just German businesses too. Like, I mean, Hitler did have relationships with some like U.S. capitalists as well, because there was a great fear.
The Koch family built the oil industries for both Stalin and Hitler. So I mean, that's a little bit.
What a legacy
that's
they
impartiality there.
Yeah.
And just be clear, this Indiana piece of legislation would ban so-called divisive concepts from school curriculums. So this guy, who's actually the guy we heard from, the lawmaker, was like sort of on the progressive edge of the support of that bill. Like, it's okay to discuss them, but it should just be like, let the student, like, you don't necessarily need to talk about the bad parts of the fascism or the Nazism. You bring up racism, you got to also talk in the same way, or anti-racism, you got to talk in the same way about slavery. Maybe slavery wasn't bad. It should just be neutral. Owning people, the same as not owning people.
They just want the kids to be like squishy, uneducated blobs that absorb our society's pre-existing conditions and just think of them as right and good and natural.
I think it's actually worse than that. Frankly, I think it's that what Matt's saying. They want to be able to promote some form of fascism. They don't necessarily perceive it that way, or maybe they do. But this is the sort of the way that they sort of this is the stowaway, essentially.
I mean, McCarthyism, the House Un-American Activities Committee said at the start, yeah, we're going to look into fascism and communism, both of them. And which one did they really look into?
Right.
I have mixed feelings about this clip with Laura Loomer. Because I had totally forgot that she exists. And on some level, that is what she's arguing happened to her. But then on another level, I'm like, I'm not obligated to know that Laura Loomer exists. She doesn't know that I exist. I don't know that she ever did. Am I an unperson because of that? Here is Laura Loomer discussing her deplatforming with VDare. VDare is, how would you characterize them, Matt?
Just extremely far right, I think. I don't know specifically outside of that. But yeah.
Laura Loomer, you'll recall, had changed herself to the Twitter corporate headquarters because she apparently had lost her Twitter account or her blue check.
That's inspiring.
I can't remember which one it was.
I'm going to do that if that happens
soon.
To me. Yeah.
Soon. Here's her interview.
It takes a very heavy emotional toll on you as well, because it's a form of psychological warfare. Because not only do you become unpersoned in the digital public sphere where most people are communicating now, especially, as everything has really gone virtual post-COVID world, but they try to make you a non-person so that people just forget about you. Because let's be honest, right? No one really memorizes cell phone numbers anymore. Nobody really memorizes people's birthdays anymore. No, they rely on social media. Oh, so-and-so just had a birthday. They posted their photo on Instagram. Let me go say hello. Oh, I haven't caught up with so-and-so in a long time. Let me go see what they're doing on Facebook or Twitter, right? And after a while, when you don't have a presence in the digital world, people forget about you. Not just online, but in your personal life too. So it's a very lonely lifestyle. It doesn't ever go away, and it's a very lonely lifestyle. And it's kind of ironic because, I guess in the literal sense, I'm famous, right? People think, oh, Laura Loomer is famous in the sense for being banned everywhere. And so despite having, international fame, I'm a lonely person because they have made my life very lonely.
Good. Happy about that. You know what I do picture?
But let me just also say, she's only famous because she got banned.
Yeah.
I don't even remember anything that she did other than her reacting to getting banned.
Yeah, she says she's banned everywhere. What she means by that is, in addition to being banned from Twitter for anti-Ilhan, Islamophobic bigotry, she's also banned from Uber and Lyft for tweeting out, "Someone needs to create a non-Islamic form of Uber or Lyft because I can never want to support another Islamic immigrant driver." So that's Uber and Lyft banned her for that. So yeah, she keeps getting banned, and that was also the first time I'd heard of her when she got banned for saying that tweeting that stuff.
I'm happy that she is living a lonely life. I really am.
I think being a despicable person, sort of publicly, will have consequences like that.
Well, that's the thing, is it's unfair that being despicable makes you unpopular. Although she has more popularity than your average person, obviously. I've never been invited to be on VDare or whatever that is.
But she's not a person anymore. She's been unpersoned.
She got Loomered.
She's like in the Back to the Future photo and just slowly fading out, and everyone else around her is still there, but
she got Loomered. She got Loomered.
She says lonely, but she could say homeless. It could be a lot worse. Apparently, it's lucrative enough to keep you going somehow.
Yep, she got loomered. Totally loomered.
I don't know what you're
That's
doing.
the name of her book.
Oh.
Loomered, How I Became the Most Banned Woman in the World.
Yeah, that sounds like she's a person to me.
One would imagine...
She's turned her last name into a verb.
One would imagine that we wouldn't have heard from the most banned woman in the world.
Or adjective? No. To
Right?
loomer.
I mean, almost
Anyway.
like definitionally, if we know that you... I mean, if you've got a publication, have you really been banned? I don't know.
Unpersoned, Sam.
Unpersoned. Let's check in with how the genuine left is doing these days. Oh, it turns out they're shitting on teachers' unions.
Workers. That's very pro-labor.
You know,
Dory Lightfoot.
Here is Jimmy Dore railing against the Chicago Teachers Union. As you know, for the first week back from school, the Teachers Union wanted to have safe protocols as to how them going to school, perhaps have a remote option. And the other day, their insistence on this, and then they were basically locked out of the schools by the Chicago school system. They came to an agreement, I think it was a day or two ago, where they basically just set up a metric system or metrics for when you would go remote. And so I want to clarify that because I got corrected by a listener, because yesterday I'd sort of characterized saying that they wanted the remote option. What they wanted, or at least what they settled for, was some metrics as to when that happens. Now, I am fully aware of the implications of remote learning. I have 2 children. I'm also fully aware of what the implications are of going to school when your teacher's out sick, your principal's out sick, when your fellow students, some of them will wear masks and some won't wear a mask. I have had to test my kids multiple times because they've had close contact with the few kids who did show up for school this past week.
And you're in an area in Brooklyn where people actually wear masks, let alone the rest of the country. And there's not much testing in some areas of this country as well.
Indeed. But here's Jimmy Dore really taking it out on the Chicago Teachers Union. And ostensibly, I guess, because this is what's going to play on Rumble. I'm not sure why.
But there's a big debate about whether they should open the schools because of COVID and because Omicron is so much more contagious. Omicron, the symptoms of Omicron are very mild, and they're like a cold. And a lot of people are saying that's good because that signals the end of the pandemic, because now we're going to become endemic and now it will just circulate. And the symptoms that it will present with are those of a cold, even though it's not, it's the Omicron cold. So everybody's shitting their pants about kids.
Like a positive point.
It'll be mild pretty much only if you are vaccinated and boosted, by the way.
And even then, not necessarily the case, but we do know that how many people died yesterday of the Omicron cold?
Oh, I have that written down. 1,736.
They died yesterday from the Omicron cold. We have record number of people hospitalized, record number of children hospitalized. We do know that the vast majority of people who die, even if they've been vaccinated, have comorbidities. But we have 1,700 people dying daily in the country right now of the Omicron cold.
And if you get a cold as a kid, you might be at a higher risk for diseases like diabetes, which they're finding out.
And we also know that 10 to 20%, at least prior to Omicron, we don't really know the details of Omicron because it's only been around literally for a month.
Yeah, but colds do the same kind of thing.
Well, can I just clarify? When he says Omicron cold, do we know he doesn't know Greek, and Omicron is Greek for strains health systems and education systems?
I mean, this is just like, it's hard to know how much stupidity is involved in this, or just sheer recklessness and just sort of just sort of vanity.
It's the why not
greed.
both
He's all in.
meme.
His chips are all in it.
But it could be both, right?
Yeah.
All right, but go back just a little bit.
And the symptoms that it will present with are those of a cold. Even though it's not, it's the Omicron cold. So everybody shitting their pants about kids having to go to school are just repeating propaganda from big pharma-funded establishment news. Congratulations. Do you know the damage?
Pause it for 1 second.
That is done to kids?
Let's just look up when we're not seeing an increase in kids in the ICU. Because I don't know when that was written that he's putting up there. But here, this is just unbelievable. Child COVID hospitalizations are up, especially in 5 states. This is the same article that he took that from. Is he doing this again? Is he doing this again? Go back. Put this up. Because if he's doing this again, it's un-effing believable. Because I thought he fired that.
Did he rehire that guy?
Yeah.
Did he rehire? Go back a little bit. But I want you to play that clip of Jimmy. And then I want you to just look at that link I just sent you. Now, we don't know when he pulled that from because he doesn't cite it. It says NBC News there. Go right there. Keep the screen up on that clip that he had. And we test anybody who's admitted to the hospital, whatever reason, to see whether or not they have COVID. And we're definitely seeing an increase in cases. However, we're really not seeing an increase in children who are hospitalized for COVID.
Yes,
or in the
that's
intensive
Dr.
care.
Paul Offit. He's quoting here. I just found it in the article. Vaccine expert at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
Okay, now pop up the link I just sent you.
That does seem like it is a direct quote from the article.
Okay, and at the same time, but the states, okay, Offit, go back up, scroll
No,
up.
it's down here.
Okay.
We test anybody who's admitted to the hospital for whatever reason.
We're definitely seeing an increase in case. We're not really seeing an increase in children who are hospitalized for COVID or in the intensive care unit for now. When was this? December 28th. We are now 2 weeks out from that, and we look at the hospitalizations of children, and it's up. And it's child hospitalizations are up as the title of the piece. Then he pulls the one quote where they didn't see this. But we know that this is up. So he pulls literally the one quote from the piece.
And the guy works in Philadelphia. This is a discussion from, I would imagine that this is a national data. The number of kids hospitalized with COVID has more than doubled in 10 states, as well as Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, according to the analysis.
But in Philadelphia, they're not seeing it. And so that's the one that he's going to highlight. In New York, we're seeing it. In New Jersey, in Ohio,
Florida,
Illinois, but on December 28th, we didn't see it in Philadelphia. So that's the quote I'm going to pick from the story. Yeah, like what kind of scum would do this? But let's continue to watch that kind of scum.
Because he attacks workers here too.
That wasn't even the thing.
And now I can't wait for him to tell us about kids.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he doesn't have kids, as far as I know.
No, he doesn't have kids.
But he cares about them more than any.
He cares about the children.
Oh, this is the healthcare guy too.
He cares about the children.
He wants Medicare for all. Don't you understand?
Go ahead.
It's the Omicron cold. So everybody shitting their pants about kids having to go to school are just repeating propaganda from big pharma-funded establishment news. Congratulations. Do you know the damage?
Pause it. Keep it up. He is quoting one quote from an establishment news source, NBC News, that reported in Philadelphia they're not seeing a rise in pediatric cases, despite the fact that news article he pulls from says that in 5 states they are seeing a pediatric rise. But it's the establishment news that's being paid off to not provide.
Yeah.
I mean, but continue.
Congratulations. Do you know the damage that is done to kids not being socialized in schools, we don't even know.
Right.
But it's great. And the Chicago Public Schools Teacher Union are so fear-mongered, they just voted to end in-school, in-person.
Look at the date on that.
July 19th, 2020.
Okay, it's on July 20th, 2020.
Look at the date on
Fucking
that.
psycho.
What a psycho. What a psycho. We know that we have broken pediatric hospitalization records for COVID during this Omicron wave. And I say this as someone who's sending my kids to school despite this going on. But to go out there and pretend that this is not an issue is just sheer lying. Continue.
This union fearmonger.
Yes, here we go.
Oh, well, yeah, but here's the kicker.
Maybe they're fearmongered into thinking they need a union in the first place.
School. They are at a higher risk of contracting the Omicron cold. Yes. Yeah. They are at a less risk for severe disease. So what you're saying is we're using the word risk now to describe the symptoms of a cold. So kids are at greater risk of catching something that will present as a cold.
Top 5 Zoe reported symptoms. So this is the early London data, right? Most common, runny nose. Second most common, headache. Third most common, fatigue. Sometimes the fatigue was bad, sometimes it was mild. Fourth most common feature, sneezing. Fifth most common feature, sore throat. The implication is obvious. If you have any of these and you've had colds in the past, you're going to think it's a cold, but it may well not be. It may be a Omicron cold. Need to get tested.
So there you have it. That's what people are locking down to avoid that.
Who's locking down?
Yeah. They think it's to avoid something more deadly. They're misinformed. Why? Because they're getting their information from the establishment. I'll tell you what I think. We should keep them open and kids should be going to schools.
Interesting. So, I mean, he doesn't want to, he let it slip earlier where he railed against the union. He was like the Chicago Teachers Union. Then he kind of has to backtrack and doesn't want to go full, full anti-union in his rant there. But this is the guy that's pro-worker and pro-labor and pro-working man, right? Because for a guy like Jimmy, a worker, a member of a union, is only when you Google coal mine worker or cop that looked like my dad or just regular old white guy, basically, that I knew growing up. And that's the kind of person that I want to protect. That's part of why he's able to, so flippantly feed into racism and sexism towards people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar or whatever when he attacks the squad, is because his perception of who he wants to represent is pretty much just like a white guy. And so he doesn't see Chicago teachers, the Chicago Teachers Union, as workers. And neither does his audience.
Let's see if we can get that part of the where he specifically mentions the union stuff. But the bottom line is nothing of what he's saying. Does he have an absolute a clue whatsoever of what he's referring to? But in fact, the reality is no one does at this point in terms of the long term. The only thing we know is that we're at peak pediatric hospitalizations for. In terms of Omicron, we don't know if that means that kids are subjected to long COVID in the way that people are from Delta. Or,
guess we'll just hope not.
Maybe. But figures. But Jimmy apparently understands the long-term socialization implications of being out of school for the first 2 weeks to January. Right? I mean, somehow a lot of the private schools were able to do this. A lot of the private schools, that's what they did.
Lori Lightfoot's they're doing all their stuff distance. Not like she's having in-person meetings.
And if it was such an issue, why did Chicago close the schools? Why did Chicago decide to lock out the teachers? I mean, give me a break. This is just it's demented.
I like the pose, though, that they're like they're anti-pharma and anti the establishment. Dude, you are agreeing with Nate Silver, Lori Lightfoot, Peter Ducey, Joe Biden, Jen Psaki.
Yeah.
That's what you guys are supporting right now. You're supporting, and oh, look at this American Institute for Economic Research. They said that actually the shutdowns are bad for the most vulnerable. Nah, this is all bullshit. This is all bullshit.
Unbelievable. I mean, it's one thing to say we need to get support for parents in this instance, but you cannot get that support unless you acknowledge that there is a reason why students might come in. And the fact of the matter is that all the parents. Now, I grant you, this is from the Wall Street Journal, and it's not from, whatever, some rinky-dink website that says something else. Schools see a big drop in attendance as students stay away, citing COVID-19. Public school attendance has dropped to unusually low levels, complicating efforts to keep schools open. New York City saw its overall attendance rate fall below 70% when classes. I mean, I can tell you, there was less than half the kids in my son's class.
Were they fearmongered home?
Apparently, these parents have no idea what their kids need. In Boston public schools, student attendance hovered around 70% since winter break, down from 90% before the holidays. Those parents in Boston also have no idea what they're doing. Chicago, 2/3 of public school students were present January 3rd, rising to 72% the next day. Attendance was 85% during the last week of school before winter break, and historically has been above 90%. So you had parents who had taken their kids out because they were afraid of getting COVID before they went and visited people. That's what's going on there. All these parents have no idea what they're doing about their kids, but Jimmy does. And everybody who's concerned about COVID is worried about catching a cold because they're not willing to let their kids be the guinea pig as to whether they'll get long COVID or whether they'll bring it home and get somebody else who will get long COVID.
And that the question you asked, who's locking down? The only proper noun that was in that clip was the Chicago teachers. And then the exact same day that Jen Psaki and all these people are going to Chicago teachers, that's what Jimmy thought he needed to emphasize.
Yep. Unbelievable. All right, let's read some IMs and let's get out of here. Big Dick Cheney. Romney is absolutely going to vote for Trump in 2024, even though Trump supporters would have beaten him to death had they found him on January 6th. Dalton's, Juul helped me transition from cigarettes. Weaker vapes helped me quit the Juul and quit nicotine altogether. I didn't use Juul, but that was sort of my experience too on some level. Sam Stones, ask her about the conspiracy theory that vape lung was trial run of COVID. Laugh my ass off. Left of the box. A boot, my IM from last Friday, Toke. From Toke, pronounced toque, is what Canadians call beanies. You're practically bilingual now, eh? Left is best. I couldn't understand half that anyways. Justin, are there any studies about long COVID with a vax? I think we answered that question. Ambica J. There are also rules, regulations for driving, and a general understanding that you won't drive after drinking because there's no consensus that drunk driving sucks. There's no consensus for COVID. Anti-Senstrata. There's been a lot of talk about the human cost of China's zero COVID strategy. While politically impossible in America, do you think that there could be another way to end the pandemic? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, we have talks with epidemiologists, and these are people who spent their whole entire lives studying this stuff. People who worked on Ebola, people who worked on, the bird flu, people who worked on HIV. And there's only so much information that we have. And the question is like, how do you approach, you're in an area where there are, cliffs and it's dark out. Do you start jogging around or do you walk carefully? I mean, that's basically what it is. Like, we just don't know. And so you are cautious because we do know that some people are getting very sick. Juicy. Whoever claims that capitalism doesn't fuel innovation obviously hasn't seen that Wink news story.
Yeah, look at all the innovation we're doing. We're doing like Bitcoin, NFTs, all this stuff, and China's just doing like, high-speed rail, and Japan's doing like all this cool stuff, but whatever.
Strappy Wappy. Hey, Samantha, you should wear a shirt that has black and white design on it so it can match your salt and pepper beard and hair. It would be game over for the fellas when you do that. All right.
Interesting
theory. Tony Grouchy. It really doesn't matter that Fauci leaves or gets fired. He's gone. The right wing will point to that as proof that that he was bad or evil or incompetent, had to go. But my point is that it's not about, with all due respect to Fauci, I don't care what they think about Fauci. I just want them to not be able to have one more tool in their toolbox to pretend that the pandemic is not a pandemic. Tucker Carlton, Bradley, play the clip of Loomer applying the logic of her cancellation to the prison system and solution to break up or nationalize social media companies. Lantor, a name is everything. Not sure I understand what that means. Dr. Scrubworth, long maintained that Aussies are some of the best at the world at cursing. And the final IM of the day. Nicole from Buffalo, I am so grateful to not be in high school during the pandemic. I can't imagine what these kids must be feeling through all this. I agree with you. It is a bit of a nightmare for kids. I mean, it's a nightmare for everybody, but the kids, it's rough. Matt, Bradley, Emma, great job today. Emma will be here tomorrow. I will see you on Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in.